Chapter 9:29. The battle in the Soaring Sky Academy's 100 Battles Tower was still ongoing. Around the 100 Battles platform, there were 40 disciples from the Flat Sky Academy, and the rest were from the Soaring Sky Academy. At this moment, the disciples from the Flat Sky Academy were all smiling and pointing at each other. On the other hand, the disciples from the Soaring Sky Academy were the opposite. Some of them had a sullen face, some were gnashing their teeth, some had bloodshot eyes, and some were panting with anger. They were about to explode, but they were holding themselves back. On the battle stage, Nyashinkong was currently fighting an old disciple of the Heaven's Peace Academy. From the looks of it, Nyashinkong was at a disadvantage. He was mostly on the defensive and rarely counterattacked. On the other hand, his opponent, the old disciple of the Heaven's Peace Academy, had a smile on his face. He seemed to be mocking Nyashinkong. As he attacked, he would occasionally say a few words. Nyashinkong, your strength is still the same as before. You haven't made any progress. Chao Qingfeng mocked as he used a sword skill. Nyashinkong was ranked 3rd in the Soaring Sky Academy, and Chao Qingfeng was also ranked 3rd in the Equal Sky Academy. Ever since they had fought a few years ago, Nyashinkong had been defeated by Chao Qingfeng's sword every time. Every time, he would be mocked by Chao Qingfeng. This time, Chao Qingfeng was the one leading the team to the Soaring Sky Academy. Nyashinkong knew that he wasn't Chao Qingfeng's opponent, and he knew that he would be humiliated if he fought with Chao Qingfeng. But he still fought without hesitation. Facing Chao Qingfeng's mockery, Nyashinkong didn't say a word. He didn't give up and tried his best to find a chance to counterattack. However, Chao Qingfeng was his old opponent, and he knew Nyashinkong well enough. He wouldn't give Nyashinkong a chance to counterattack. Nyashinkong, if I were you, I would just leave the Flying Heaven Pavilion. If you continue to cultivate, you'll just be wasting your time and the resources of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Chao Qingfeng continued to mock him. Nyashinkong didn't get angry, but the disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy below the 100 Battles platform were furious. Fortunately, my cultivation talent is 3rd grade. Otherwise, I would have been sent to the Soaring Sky Academy, which is a gathering camp for trash, a new disciple from the Flat Sky Academy said with a smile. I think you'd better get Zhong Nukin here. Otherwise, if this continues, you won't have the face to see anyone. That's right. Our head senior apprentice brother said that in the entire Sky Soaring Academy, only Zhong Nukin is worthy of being looked at. The others are all useless. Even Zhong Nukin was defeated by our head senior apprentice brother, laughed an old disciple of the Sky Soaring Academy. At this moment, Nyashinkong was defeated in the battle arena. Since they had placed their bets, Nyashinkong could only take out 10,000 high-grade elemental crystals and 100 fairy points for Chao Qingfeng. There was a rule in the Flying Sky Pavilion that the loser of a spar between disciples would have to pay at least 1,000 high-grade crystals and 10 flying points to the loser. Disciples could also place their own bets, but they could not bet more than 10,000 high-grade crystals and 100 flying points. Nyashinkong was defeated. Li Qian and Zhong Nukin arrived one after another. They had no choice but to come. In front of the sword technique mural, Chu Mu's eyes were wide open. Wherever his line of sight could see, the mark instantly transformed into a golden sword light. The golden resplendent sword light contained a shocking sharpness, causing Chu Mu's eyes to feel a piercing pain. His mental world seemed to be about to be split apart. This was the power of metal. It wasn't considered a concept, profound, or law, but it was on the same level as profound. That was because Chu Mu's comprehension of the power of heaven and earth was at the same level as profound. This resplendent golden sword light left the painting and turned into a sharp sword. It was right in front of Chu Mu's eyes, directly reflecting on his spiritual world. In Chu Mu's spiritual world, a shadow seemed to appear. It was holding a golden sword and practicing a sword art. This sword technique was very simple. There were only 9 moves in total. However, within the simplicity, there was something extraordinary. Each move had a sharp edge, and each move was stronger than the last. The power of metal started from shallow to deep, little by little, allowing the swordsman to continuously deepen his understanding and application of the power of metal until he truly grasped it. The 9 moves of the metal sword technique appeared again and again in Chu Mu's mind. The sharp edge was displayed again and again. It was as if there was nothing in the world that could withstand it. Everything would be cut apart by the power of metal. After practicing in his mental world 3 times, Chu Mu had completely memorized the 9 moves of the metal sword technique. He only needed to properly practice them in the future. In the spiritual world, the golden sword shattered and the shadow disappeared. The golden sword light returned to the mural and turned back into a scratch, never moving again. After waiting for an entire month, he finally got a chance to comprehend the flying sky painting. If he wanted to comprehend it in the future, he would have to pay enough flying points. With Chu Mu's current amount of flying points, he was far from having the chance. This was a rare opportunity, so he had to grasp it firmly. After comprehending the first metal sword art, he would have to comprehend the second, third, fourth, or even more sword arts. Every swordsman would face the same problem when trying to comprehend the flying sky painting. That was because comprehending the painting consumed the mind. Everyone's mind was different, but it was limited. Some people's minds were strong, so they could spend more time comprehending the painting. Some people's minds were weak, so they could spend less time comprehending the painting. The strength of a swordsman's mind was often related to the strength of his soul. If his soul was strong, his mind would naturally be affected. If his soul was weak, his mind would be weaker. Chu Mu was able to refine his sword intent and all kinds of profound to the limit of the 9th revolution. His soul was extremely strong, so naturally his mind was stronger than ordinary swordsmen. Not long after, another scratch appeared on the mural, as though it had come to life, exuding an aura of vitality. This was a beam of green sword light, containing boundless vitality. It was like a patch of green grass, like a forest, verdant and lush, filled with a natural freshness. It was the power of wood. The power of wood sword light also flickered in front of Chu Mu's eyes. It was reflected in the spiritual world, and another shadow appeared. It held a green sword in its hand and executed a sword art. Just like the metal sword art, this wood sword art also had 9 moves. Each move explained the mysteries of the power of wood. The first move was the most direct and simple, while the other moves went deeper. Exuberant life, force filled Chu Mu's mental world. His mental world seemed to have become a primeval forest. Lush and dense life force emanated from the roots, tree trunks, and branches. It filled the entire forest and spread to the outside world. After 3 times, Chu Mu also memorized this with sword art. Without resting, Chu Mu continued to comprehend. At this time, 3 people stood up. They glanced at the crowd and turned to leave. Chu Mu began to comprehend the 3rd sword art. The further he went, the harder it was to comprehend it. When he comprehended the 1st sword art, it only took him 3 breaths. When he comprehended the 2nd sword art, it took him 10 breaths. Now that he was comprehending the 3rd sword art, the difficulty was even higher. It took him less than 60 breaths. A blue sword light suddenly left the mural. In the blink of an eye, it melted and formed a lake. It gradually expanded and sparkled. Ripples spread out layer by layer. In the blink of an eye, it looked like a stream of water. It flowed endlessly and could not be dispersed or blocked. This was the power of water. It was reflected in Chu Mu's mind. In his spiritual world, the power of water flowed. It was gentle but firm. It could nourish and destroy all things. 9 moves of the water sword art. Each move explained the mysteries of the power of water. Each move was deeper than the previous one. It truly demonstrated the mysteries of the power of water. While Chu Mu was comprehending the water sword art, another 4 people stood up and left. Their minds were almost exhausted and could not continue. After comprehending 3 sword arts in a row, Chumu felt that his mind was mostly exhausted. He did not rest. Instead, he continued to comprehend. In fact, once one's mind was exhausted, it would take a long time to recover. The Flying Heaven Pavilion had a rule that the disciples of the Flying Heaven Pavilion could not stay in the Mural Palace for more than 24 hours. Once he recovered his mind, it meant that he would not be able to comprehend the 4th sword art until he left. It took him 60 breaths to comprehend the 3rd sword art. However, it took him 600 breaths to comprehend the 4th sword art. It was 10 times longer. The consumption of his mind was also greater. The 4th sword art was the fire sword art. The fiery red sword light emitted a scorching power. It was burning fiercely as if it wanted to burn everything. It was reflected in Chumu's spiritual world. The shadow held the red sword. As it waved, flames rose from the ground and covered the entire spiritual world. It turned the spiritual world into a sea of fire. 9 moves of the fire sword technique. Each and every move was a manifestation of the power of fire. Each and every sword contained an astonishing temperature. The heat of the fire, the intensity of the fire, could incinerate everything. I should be able to comprehend the 5th sword art, Chumu thought. He was the only one left. Most of his mental strength had been used up. Chumu hoped to comprehend a 5th sword technique. Moreover, it would be best if it was an earth sword technique. It would be perfect for the metal sword technique, wood sword technique, water sword technique, and fire sword technique to form the 5 elemental sword technique. Zhong Nukin told him that the metal sword art, wood sword art, water sword art, and earth sword art formed the 5 elements sword art. That was because Chumu had displayed 5 of the 8 ultimate profound meanings. It was said that there were 5 types of profundities. If one could comprehend the 5 types of sword arts and form the 5 elemental sword arts, one would be able to comprehend the 5 types of profundities while cultivating the 5 elemental sword arts and deepen one's application and grasp of the 5 types of profundities. If one did not form the 5 element sword art, it would undoubtedly take more time to cultivate them one by one. However, would Chumu be able to comprehend the earth sword art as he wished for the 5th sword art? He was not 100% sure, because the profound meanings he had comprehended were not just the 5 profound meanings. He might comprehend the wind sword art, ice sword art, thunder sword art, and so on. Chapter 930. His head felt dizzy, and his body felt heavy. It was as if there was a mountain pressing down on his body. His consciousness was a little dazed. Every step he took felt like he was floating, as if he was stepping on cotton. This was the result of overusing his mind. It was very uncomfortable. His head felt dizzy, as if a huge rock had been stuffed into it. His head felt like it was going to split open. His body and limbs were not listening to him. Chumu did not want to experience this feeling a second time. Although it was unbearable, the harvest was delightful because Chumu had successfully comprehended the metal sword technique, wood sword technique, water sword technique, fire sword technique, and finally the earth sword technique. Comprehending the 5 sword techniques didn't mean that Chumu had grasped the 5 elemental sword technique. If he still had some mental strength left, he could continue comprehending and combine the 5 sword techniques into a 5 elemental sword technique. Unfortunately, when comprehending the earth sword technique, he had already exhausted all of his mental strength. If he wanted to combine the 5 sword techniques into a 5 elemental sword technique, he would have to work harder in the future. What was worth being happy about was that after comprehending the 5 sword arts, Chumu received 500 flying points as a reward. This was the rule of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. To comprehend the Flying Heaven murals, one had to pay 500 flying points. If one comprehended a sword art or sword skill from the murals, one would receive flying points as a reward. At this point, the flying points in Chumu's identity token had increased by several times, reaching 630 points. As long as he recovered his mental strength, he would be able to comprehend the murals again. His footsteps were as light as a feather as he walked on the path back to Soaring Sky Academy. A group of people was walking towards him. Because he was in a trance, their appearances were a little blurry in Chumu's eyes. Their voices were also a little fleeting when they entered Chumu's ears, as if they were coming from a distant place and gradually dissipating. Senior brother, the disciples of the Soaring Sky Court are too weak. Actually, I have always felt that our Flying Heaven Pavilion should abolish the Soaring Sky Court and raise the standards of recruiting disciples. A group of people with average talent who can only cultivate to the king realm is not very useful. However, that Zhongyukin actually has a grade 4 sword skill. He is really amazing. Powerful? That depends on who he's compared to. Our Sky Fair Academy's chief senior brother doesn't even need to make a move. Just the second-ranked senior brother, Tao, is enough to defeat him. If it's the chief senior brother, defeating Zhongyukin might only require a single sword strike. His voice carried a hint of arrogance, and it seemed to come from a distant time and space. It vaguely entered Chumu's ears. However, at this time, Chumu found it difficult to concentrate. Isn't that Chumu? Chumu? Is he the new disciple who broke the record in the entrance exam? Broke the record in the number of profound meanings he comprehended, and broke the record again because of his low cultivation talent? At first, he was surprised, then he mocked. In a trance, Chumu felt many sharp gazes landing on his body. There were also several tyrannical divine senses sweeping over his body and scrupulously shrouding him and even attempting to penetrate into his body. This was a very rude behavior, a very serious provocation. It was contempt for others. It was like trespassing on someone's important place without permission. It was normal to draw a sword in anger. His body was being brazenly swept by a few divine senses. This was a disguised form of humiliation. Chumu wanted to use his divine senses to counterattack, but he was powerless because he had used up too much of his mental strength. A sliver of anger appeared in his heart. While his mind was in a trance, the anger was like a candle flickering in the wind. No matter how good your comprehension ability is, no matter how many profound meanings you comprehend, so long as your cultivation talent doesn't increase, you can only be a king among ants, sneered Chao Qingfeng. Treasures that can increase one's cultivation talent are rare. Even if you spend your entire life, you might not be able to obtain one. Tao Shixiang indifferently said, even if you can raise your cultivation to grade 4, it still can't compare to our future achievements. The disdain in his voice was very clear. Several divine senses left Chumu's body. The people from the Flat Sky Academy passed by Chumu. One of them seemed to intentionally use his shoulder to bump into Chumu. As a result, Chumu's body swayed and staggered, almost falling down. As expected of a genius who broke 3 records in a row, the way you walk is completely different from us, ordinary people. Not only did the person who bumped into Chumu not feel the slightest bit apologetic, but he even laughed mockingly. Chumu swore that no matter what happened in the future, he would never exhaust his mental strength. Originally, he had only wanted to properly grasp this rare opportunity to comprehend the swordsmanship murals. He had been so immersed in comprehending the murals that he hadn't considered anything else. It was also because the Flying Heaven Pavilion was relatively safe that he felt more at ease. What he hadn't expected was that although his life wasn't in danger, he would still be humiliated. Chumu would remember this. He would personally return this humiliation. A flame quietly appeared in his heart, burning. After 2 days and 2 nights, Chumu's mental strength finally recovered completely. The feeling of having his mental strength fully recovered was very good, very good. The dizziness and powerlessness were all swept away, and he felt carefree as if he had been reborn. Flat Sky Academy. In the near future, I will personally go there and wipe you all out. Chu Mu stood up in the stone pavilion and muttered to himself. His tone was unprecedentedly firm. After his mental strength recovered completely, Chu Mu drew his sword and began to cultivate the swordsmanship he had comprehended from the murals. First, he cultivated the metal sword technique. The metal sword technique had 9 moves, and each move was more difficult than the last. However, Chu Mu easily displayed the first 3 moves and fully demonstrated the profoundness within them. He spent a little more time on the 4th move, but he was able to completely display it. The 5th, 6th, and 7th moves were bottlenecks. After several rounds of cultivation, although he could only truly display the 6th move, Chu Mu felt that his understanding of the profoundness of metal had been straightened out. It gradually formed a system in his mind, which helped him deepen his understanding of the profoundness of metal and further increase his control and application of it. He stopped cultivating the metal sword technique and began to cultivate the wood sword technique, then the water sword technique, the fire sword technique, and finally the earth sword technique. Chu Mu had only cultivated the 6th move of each of the 5 sword techniques. Of course, he could still completely display the stances of the 7th, 8th, and 9th moves. However, he couldn't display the profoundness within them because he hadn't comprehended them to that level yet. The metal, wood, water, fire, and earth sword techniques must be combined into a single 5 elements sword technique to save me more time. Sheathing his sword, Chu Mu began to think about how to combine the metal, wood, water, fire, and earth sword techniques into a single 5 elements sword technique. There were 3 benefits to combining the 5 elements sword techniques into a single 5 elements sword technique. First, it saved time to cultivate the 5 elements sword techniques. The time required to cultivate a single 5 elements sword technique was different. The latter required 5 times more time than the former. Second, it increased the efficiency of cultivating the 5 elements sword techniques. As long as he cultivated a single 5 elements sword technique, he would be able to comprehend the profoundness of the 5 forces of heaven and earth. The efficiency was clearly much higher than cultivating the 5 elements sword techniques individually. Third, it allowed him to obtain more flight points. The Flying Heaven Pavilion had a rule that comprehending the sword techniques from the murals would be rewarded with flight points. Similarly, cultivating the sword techniques into a single 5 elements sword technique would also be rewarded. He sat down cross-legged and cleared his mind of all distracting thoughts. He began to replay the 5 elements sword techniques in his mind, breaking them down one by one. On the path of the sword, Chu Mu's talent was unique. Adding on his perception, he was able to better comprehend sword techniques and grasp the essence of the mysteries within. Breaking down move by move, half a day later, the first 6 moves of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth sword arts were broken down by Chu Mu one by one. Next, he would naturally recombine these sword moves to form a new sword move. Recombining was much more difficult than breaking them down. Chu Mu did not bite off more than he could chew. He began to recombine the 5 elements sword techniques from the first 5 elements sword techniques. The first 5 elements sword technique was the simplest. Breaking down the 5 elements sword technique was the easiest. However, recombining the 5 elements sword techniques was 10 times harder than breaking them down. For a moment, Chu Mu was unable to recombine the 5 elements sword techniques into a new 5 elements sword technique. He kept feeling that something was missing, like a primer. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. Chu Mu recalled what Xia Yunfei had told him. The Lesser Flying Heaven sword technique is the foundation of all sword techniques in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. The Lesser Flying Heaven sword techniques. Moves appeared in his mind. He performed them one by one until he reached the 11th move. So that's how it is. The Lesser Flying Heaven sword technique has 99 moves. When all 11 moves are combined, they are actually one move. If I use the 11 moves of the Lesser Flying Heaven Sword technique as a primer to integrate the 5 elements sword techniques, Chumu hurriedly began to deduce. This was a mental task that consumed a lot of mental energy. However, he was in his sword gauntlet at this moment. Without his permission, no one else could enter. Therefore, he felt more at ease. Fully immersing himself in the derivation, he used the Small Flying Heavens sword technique's first move as a primer to absorb the 5 elements of metal: wood, water, fire, and earth. Indeed, the first move was much smoother than Chumu had imagined. The essence of the disintegrated sword technique was gradually absorbed into the first move of the Lesser Flying Heaven Sword technique. Under Chumu's deduction, it began to fuse. This was a transformation. The transformation of the sword technique was gradually sublimated under Chumu's deduction and fusion. It transcended the original shackles and reached a new height. The process of fusion went smoothly, but the progress was very slow. Time passed bit by bit. Chumu was immersed in it and was unaware of it. Finally, the disintegrated sword technique's essence, with the Lesser Flying Heaven Sword technique's first move as a primer, began to form the framework of a brand new sword technique. Then it slowly perfected and filled the interior, causing the new sword technique to gradually take shape and be perfected. Finally, the new sword technique was completed. A strange feeling arose spontaneously, causing Chumu's mind to tremble. In the spiritual world, a phantom held a transparent sword. There seemed to be 5 colors flashing on the sword. When the sword was swung, Chumu, who was sitting cross-legged in the outside world, suddenly leaped up. The sword of no return overlapped with the phantom in the spiritual world as he swung his sword. Chapter 931. 5 different colors of light flashed on the sword of no return. The trajectory of the sword was clear. It looked ordinary, but there was a kind of mystery that separated the 5 elements. When the sword was unleashed, all sorts of comprehensions appeared in Chumu's heart like spring water. This caused Chumu to be stunned. His sword stopped in midair, and his eyes flickered with all sorts of lights as comprehension gradually appeared. He withdrew the sword and waved it again. There was a slight change in the trajectory, and it was more perfect. Earlier, he had only seen the sword. Now, as he unleashed it, he was slowly comprehending the profoundness within it. He was slowly making adjustments to make this sword move even more perfect. After waving the sword, he paused for a while and continued to comprehend. Then he waved the sword again. He did this repeatedly until he comprehended the sword to the most perfect level. The 5 elements were separated by the sword. The sword contained the mystery of the 5 elements of metal: wood, water, fire, and earth. It was the first time. This sword was the first move of the 5 elements sword art. After successfully practicing the first move of the 5 elemental sword technique, Chumu let out a sigh of relief. However, he felt his body sway and felt a little dizzy. This was because he had used up a lot of his mental strength this time. Fortunately, he did not overuse it. He quickly sat down cross-legged to recover. This time, it took him a total of 42 hours to recover, which was 4 hours less than before. After recovering, Chumu was thinking about whether to comprehend the second move of the 5 elements sword art. Suddenly, the seal outside was triggered. Someone came to see Chumu. It was Nya Shinkong. "Senior brother Nya," Chumu greeted. "How's your progress in comprehending the murals?" Nya Shinkong smiled. "Not bad," Chumu said. "Junior brother Chu, I know I shouldn't ask, but I can't help but want to ask. How many sword arts have you comprehended?" Nya Shinkong hesitated for a moment and stared at Chumu with a serious face. This was a little secret. In terms of friendship, Nya Shinkong and Chumu were not so close that they could talk about everything. Nya Shinkong could not blame Chumu for not telling him, because it was a little rude for him to ask first. Metal, wood, water, fire, earth. Chumu looked into Nya Shinkong's eyes and answered. He felt that Nya Shinkong was a good person and he could make friends with him. Besides, it was not a big secret. Metal, wood, water, fire, and earth. Nie Shinkong's eyes widened. As far as he knew, no one in the Flying Heaven Pavilion had been able to comprehend 5 sword techniques at once, let alone coincidentally corresponding to the 5 elements. Good, good, Nie Shinkong said excitedly. After a long while, he gradually calmed down. This time, the disciples of the Flat Sky Academy came to our Soaring Sky Academy and showed off their strength. Even senior brother Zhong was humiliated. Chu Mu fell silent. He couldn't help but think of the Fair Sky Academy's disciple he had met on his way back after comprehending the murals. It was just that he had recovered his mental strength as soon as he came back. After he recovered, he focused all his attention on comprehending the swordsmanship. For a moment, he forgot about it. Although he had temporarily forgotten about it, it did not mean that he had completely forgotten about it. When the time came, Chu Mu would get back at him. Ever since a long time ago, the Soaring Sky Academy has been at the bottom. The disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy are always bullied by the disciples of the Flat Sky Academy and the Soaring Sky Academy because our talent and potential are not as good as theirs. Nie Shinkong opened his mouth and started talking nonstop. Every single one of us from the Soaring Sky Court has been suppressing our anger and doing our best to increase our strength. We hope that one day we'll be able to take the initiative to barge into the Soaring Sky Court and show off our pride. We might even be able to enter the Soaring Sky Court. But we can't because we can't do it. Nie Shinkong's expression dimmed. Our talent is indeed good in the outside world, and we can be considered geniuses among geniuses. However, in the Flying Heaven Pavilion, our talent is at the lowest level. No matter how hard we work, it will be difficult for us to catch up to them in the same cultivation environment. The difference in talent can't be made up for by hard work alone. Our cultivation talent alone is enough to limit us to the blessed realm. Chu Mu didn't say anything because Nie Shinkong hadn't finished speaking yet. You're different. Even the disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy can't compare to you in terms of comprehension and profoundness. Your only flaw is your cultivation talent. Nie Shinkong stared into Chu Mu's eyes and said in a deep voice, now that everyone's cultivation is at the same level, there's no advantage in terms of cultivation. The difference in strength can only be determined by the comprehension and mastery of sword skills, as well as battle experience. Your comprehension ability will give you a great advantage in comprehending stronger sword skills. Given some time, your strength will increase exponentially, especially since you've just become a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. The cultivation environment and resources of the Flying Heaven Pavilion will give you a huge boost in strength in a short period of time. Nie Shinkong's words made sense. After becoming a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, the cultivation environment would be much better, and his strength would increase greatly in a short period of time. I think a cultivation talent won't be able to stop you from advancing, Nie Shinkong said. Nie Shinkong said, I hope that after you improve your strength, you can go to the Sky Rising Court and make our Sky Rising Court proud. I will. Chu Mu nodded and said in a calm and firm tone. It wasn't realistic to say that he wanted to make the Soaring Sky Academy proud, but it was true that he wanted to make himself proud. Because of the previous encounter, Chu Mu had already made up his mind to get back at them. However, there was no need for him to tell others about this. But before that, you have to become the chief senior brother of the Soaring Sky Academy, Nie Shinkong said with a laugh. Senior brother Nie, aren't you afraid that senior brother Zhong will be unhappy? Chu Mu said with a smile. Senior brother Zhong can't wait for you to do it. In fact, as long as someone can do it, every disciple of the Soaring Sky Academy will be happy if senior brother Zhong is happy. Nie Shinkong said, Well, I feel much more relaxed now that I've told you this. I won't delay your cultivation anymore. After saying that, Nie Shinkong left. Chu Mu also left for the Sky Essence Valley. The Flying Heaven Pavilion had its own holy land for cultivation. The flying heaven murals were equivalent to the hidden art pavilions of other forces. The Sky Essence Valley was specially used to cultivate the sword origin. To cultivate in the Sky Essence Valley, one had to pay 100 flying points. After paying 100 flying points, Chu-Mu entered the Sky Essence Valley. The Sky Essence Valley, as its name suggested, was a valley. The valley was surrounded by various powerful seals and was heavily guarded. It couldn't be entered easily. As soon as he entered the Sky Essence Valley, Chu-Mu was shocked by the shockingly rich yuan qi of heaven and earth. When he looked at it with his naked eyes, he could see white qi floating in the air, filling the entire place. His whole body was surrounded by the rich yuan qi of heaven and earth. He didn't need to circulate his cultivation technique. The rich and pure yuan qi of heaven and earth automatically drilled into Chu-Mu's body. In just 10 breaths, the yuan qi of heaven and earth couldn't enter Chu-Mu's body because it was full. There was no more space. No wonder it's a holy land for cultivation. Chu-Mu thought to himself. The Sky Essence Valley wasn't suitable for normal cultivation because the yuan qi of heaven and earth here was too rich and pure. Although it was said that a place with rich spiritual qi of heaven and earth would be better, it also depended on the cultivator. For a place like the Sky Essence Valley, it was only suitable for a short period of time. There were 2 prerequisites. Firstly, a strong enough body. Secondly, the cultivation realm must be high enough. Otherwise, one wouldn't be able to control the rich and pure yuan qi of heaven and earth that enter the body. Chu-Mu met the 2 prerequisites. His cultivation realm had already reached the limit of the God condensation realm. The only thing he lacked was energy. It wasn't easy to accumulate energy in the God condensation realm, and it usually took a long time. In order to prevent the disciples of the Flying Heaven Pavilion from spending too much time on the cultivation of the sword origin, the body of a God condensation realm swordsman was strong enough to withstand it. Once the cultivation realm was high enough, they could directly enter the Sky Essence Valley. In a short period of time, their cultivation would be able to increase to the corresponding level of the cultivation realm. There were many ways to increase the cultivation realm. It could be through observing and comprehending, or through cultivating swordsmanship or sword skills. Speaking of which, with the Sky Essence Valley, the disciples of the Flying Heaven Pavilion could naturally spend more time on cultivating swordsmanship and sword skills. The Sky Essence Valley wasn't big. There were some stone platforms that had the effect of gathering the yuan qi of heaven and earth. Chu-Mu chose an empty space and sat down cross-legged. He began to circulate the Sky Essence sword, absorbing the rich and pure yuan qi of heaven and earth that entered his body and quickly transforming it into the Sky Essence sword. After consuming the Dragon Tiger Profound Origin Pill, Chu-Mu's cultivation had risen to the complete divine condensation realm. However, he had only just entered the complete divine condensation realm. Now he could clearly feel that his sword yuan was rising bit by bit at a speed that he could clearly feel. Just as a portion of the heaven-earth yuan qi that had entered his body had been refined, the heaven-earth yuan qi in the outside world had taken the initiative to flow into Chu-Mu's body. With the help of the stone platform, the heaven-earth yuan qi became even denser, causing Chu-Mu's body to be constantly filled with heaven-earth yuan qi. No matter how he refined it, he was always filled with it. Chu-Mu could only use all of his divine thoughts to control the qi of heaven and earth. He constantly controlled the qi of heaven and earth and the operation of the heavenly wasteland sword essence. He constantly absorbed and refined the qi of heaven and earth and turned it into heavenly wasteland sword essence, increasing the quantity of heavenly wasteland sword essence little by little. Gradually, the heavenly wasteland sword essence rose from the complete divine condensation realm to the mid-complete divine condensation realm, and then from the mid-complete divine condensation realm to the late-complete divine condensation realm. Chu-Mu not only had to pay attention to increasing the quantity of sword essence, but he also had to pay attention to refining the purity of sword essence. He had to take care of both sides. Fortunately, the Heaven-Earth Yuan Qi in the Heaven Essence Valley was dense enough and pure enough. It was almost endless. If it was in the outside world, it would be very difficult to improve like this. Relying on Yuanjing would also take a lot of time. Relying on elixirs was difficult because the elixirs used by divine condensation realm swordsmen could only be refined by alchemy grandmasters. Every elixir, especially those that could increase cultivation, was even more precious. Time passed slowly, hour after hour. Gradually, Chu Mu's cultivation reached the late, complete, divine condensation realm. Any higher, and it would be the limit of the divine condensation realm. Once his cultivation reached the limit of the divine condensation realm, Chu Mu would only need to spend a little time every day to cultivate the heavenly wasteland sword essence once. He could then use the rest of his time on other aspects of cultivation. Chapter 932. The Flying Heaven Pavilion was a small world with green mountains and clear water. The environment was beautiful. Rumbling sounds came from afar, as if thousands of soldiers and horses were galloping. Amidst the rumbling sounds, the ground seemed to be constantly shaking. Looking over, one could see a white waterfall falling from the sky, as if the water of the Milky Way was pouring down from the ninth heaven. It was a waterfall with a height of more than 300 meters and a width of more than 100 meters. It was like a monstrous wave pouring down from a height of more than 300 meters. Thousands of hectares of water fell with a terrifying power, as if it was going to destroy everything. Under the huge waterfall, there was a bottomless pool. The pool was huge, with a radius of several thousand meters, and it flowed into the distance. Under the power of the collapse of heaven and earth, there was a figure in it. The figure stood upright, like a tenacious and unyielding sword, pointing straight to the sky. He allowed the water pouring down from a height of more than 300 meters. The power of thousands of hectares was more terrifying than a mountain falling down, but it could not do anything to the figure, not even make him bend his waist. It had been 3 days and 3 nights. The figure stood under the waterfall and suffered the impact of the waterfall for 3 days and 3 nights. 3 days and 3 nights, even a piece of steel would be shattered under such a terrifying impact. A human's flesh and blood could actually surpass steel. A huge amount of water poured down, as if it was going to smash the figure into pieces. Chu Mu stood quietly with his eyes closed, carefully comprehending the power of the water falling from the sky. Water could nourish all things. Water droplets could penetrate stone. When the water was fierce, it could even destroy everything. Even mountains would be crushed and turned into a vast ocean. The power of water was being released to its fullest in this place. Comprehension, 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 comprehension in the confrontation. The accumulation of 3 days and 3 nights had reached its limit at this moment. Chu Mu's right hand suddenly trembled. The impact of breaking through the water could not be stopped at all, and he grasped the hilt of the non-return sword. The sharp sword was unsheathed. A cold sword light bloomed in the water curtain that was pouring down. It carried an indomitable aura and a sharpness that could cut through everything. From the bottom to the top, it was lifted up along with the unsheathing of the sword. The cold and sharp sword light was also extremely tough. With an endless momentum and terrifying sharpness, it cut open a huge amount of water from the waterfall. In the blink of an eye, it cut open the waterfall and soared into the sky. It paused in the air and exploded. Countless water droplets sprinkled down like a rainstorm. Let's name this sword Move-Cutting Waterfall. Chu Mu thought to himself. Waterfall slashing was a grade 3 sword skill of metal profound, wind profound, and water profound. 1 month had already passed. Chu Mu had successfully integrated the entire 5 elemental swordsmanship. He had also cultivated the 5 elemental swordsmanship to the 7th move, the 8th move, and the 9th move. Unfortunately, these 2 moves had yet to truly integrate the essence of the 5 elemental power. After integrating the 5 elemental swordsmanship, Chu Mu received 500 fairy points as a reward. In this month's harvest, other than the 5 elemental swordsmanship, Chu Mu's understanding of the 5 elemental profound had deepened. His application of the 5 elemental swordsmanship had also improved. Most importantly, Chu Mu had comprehended 2 grade 3 sword skills. Including the original 2 moves, he now had 4 grade 3 sword skills. Volcanic eruption, sky-shaking thunder, ceaseless waterfall slashing. Unceasing was the fusion of gold, water, and wood profound. The essence of this sword skill was that gold gave birth to water, and water gave birth to wood. The power of gold made the power of water stronger, and water nourished wood, making the power of wood even stronger. The power of wood was then released as a sword skill. The power of wood was full of vitality, growing and multiplying endlessly. Thus it was named ceaseless. Comprehending this sword skill was Chu Mu's opportunity. First, he created the 5 elemental swordsmanship, further deepening his understanding and control of the 5 elemental swordsmanship. Then he saw a blooming lotus beside a pond. In a flash of inspiration, he spent 3 days to create this sword skill. As for chopping waterfall, it took him 3 days and 3 nights under the impact of the waterfall before he finally succeeded. Chu Mu also wanted to create a 4th rank sword technique. Unfortunately, with his current accumulation, it was still not enough. He needed more and deeper understanding. He decided to temporarily put down the creation of grade 4 sword skills. He wanted to create a few more grade 3 sword skills. Regardless of whether he could use them in battle, he could still deepen his accumulation, deepen his understanding of the sword profound, and the use of sword skills. It would be of great help when he created grade 4 or even grade 5 sword skills in the future. In just a month, he had integrated the 5 elemental swordsmanship and created 2 grade 3 sword skills, ceaseless and chopping waterfall. This efficiency was many times faster than when Chu Mu was in the Sky Edge Sword Palace. Not to mention the cultivation resources. Just the cultivation environment in the Flying Heaven Pavilion was many times better than that of the Sky Edge Sword Palace. The higher the level of the cultivation environment, the richer and purer the chi of heaven and earth, the stronger the power of heaven and earth it contained, and the clearer the fluctuations. Cultivating in such an environment would be greatly enhanced. From Chu Mu, it could be seen that the quality of a cultivation environment had an obvious impact on a swordsman. In particular, the more talented a swordsman was, the better the enhancement effect. Therefore, for a swordsman, talent was very important. No matter how hard he worked, he might be able to catch up in a short period of time. However, in the long run, he would still be unable to catch up with a talented swordsman. The gap would only grow bigger. In a month, in terms of absolute strength, Chu Mu did not have any obvious improvement. However, in terms of potential, he had deepened a lot. After creating Chopping Waterfall, the next step was to perfect the 2 sword skills, Ceaseless and Chopping Waterfall. Chu Mu leaped out of the waterfall, the water on his body evaporating instantly. After returning to the stone pavilion, Chu Mu did not rest. He immediately started cultivating the 5 element sword. He had never forgotten the humiliation he had received from the disciples of the Flat Sky Academy. However, he also did not constantly remember it because there was no need for it. It was just a distraction and a waste of his time. Only when he was strong enough to sweep through the Flat Sky Academy would he remember it. At that time, he would have the ability to get back at them. After the first time, Chu Mu had not gone to the 100 Battles Pavilion again. Among all the disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy, only Zhong Mukin could defeat Chu Mu. Nie Xingkong was not a match for Chu Mu, and Li Qian was also unable to defeat Chu Mu. Right now, Chu Mu's first goal was to defeat Zhong Mukin. Only by defeating Zhong Mukin would he have the qualifications to shake the Flat Sky Academy. After calming his heart and eliminating all distracting thoughts, he focused on cultivating the 5 elements sword. After he was done, Chu decided to go to the Flying Heaven murals to comprehend the swordsmanship. He had 1,030 fairy points, which was enough for him to comprehend it twice. Sitting before the swordsmanship murals, Zhang Xian stared intently at them. Gradually, he fell into a trance and began comprehending the swordsmanship. This was his 6th sword principle. When he was comprehending the 5th sword principle, it took him 600 breaths of time. This time, it would take even longer. Fortunately, Chu was patient enough. The longer it took, the more mental energy would be consumed. Time passed by slowly. In front of Chu eyes, a blue sword light appeared. The sound of wind whistling was heard. In Chu spiritual world, the shadow was holding the blue sword and practicing a wind sword technique. One sword move after another. One move after another. It was like a gust of wind blowing, a gentle breeze, a strong gale, 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 a strong gale. He had comprehended the wind sword technique. He still had some mental strength left, so he continued to comprehend the 7th sword technique. Amidst the crackling sounds, the purple sword light seemed to tear the dark sky apart. A lightning sword technique was being practiced in Chu spiritual world. 9 sword moves, each of them explaining the essence of the lightning power, thunder's fury and extreme speed, as well as the terrifying power that could destroy everything, were vividly displayed. Lightning sword technique. Chu didn't immediately start comprehending the 8th sword principle. Instead, he recovered his mental strength first. He didn't plan to fully recover his mental strength. As long as he could recover part of it, it would be enough for him to comprehend the 8th sword principle. After spending half a day, Chu recovered a part of his mental strength and started to comprehend the 8th sword principle. The difficulty of comprehending the 8th sword principle was much higher than the 7th sword principle. It took a longer time. In the end, Chu only saw a cloud floating over. As it changed, it was reflected in his spiritual world. A shadow appeared, holding a cloud sword and practicing the cloud sword principle. There were layers of cloud shadows, constantly changing, gathering, and separating. It was endless. 9 moves of the cloud sword principle, explaining the power of the clouds. He successfully comprehended the 8th sword principle, cloud sword principle. At this point, Chu couldn't comprehend the 9th and 10th sword principle. His mental strength was almost depleted. He had stayed here for almost a day. If he wanted to comprehend the 9th and 10th sword principle, he would have to wait for the next time. There was still some mental strength left. It wasn't much, but it was enough for Chu to stay awake. After obtaining the 300 fairy points, he left the murals in his normal state and returned to his stone pavilion. First, he spent more than a day to recover his mental strength. Then he practiced the 5-element sword principle, followed by the wind sword principle, lightning sword principle, and cloud sword principle. The wind sword principle can be combined with the lightning sword principle to form the wind lightning sword principle. As for the cloud sword principle, after pondering for a while, Chu began to combine the wind sword principle and the lightning sword principle. As long as he could combine the 2 sword principles into one, he would be able to save some time and increase his efficiency. With these 3 sword techniques, after mastering them, Chu would be able to deepen his understanding and mastery of wind profound, thunder profound, and cloud profound. In terms of application, he would be able to create even more sword techniques and increase his potential in sword techniques. Everyone was cultivating. With the perfect environment of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, the potential of the new disciples had erupted. Although their strength didn't increase by much, their potential had increased by a lot. This would lay a solid foundation for them to break through to a higher level in the future. However, no one could be like Chu and comprehend 8 sword principles in just 2 visits to the murals. If word got out, Chu Mu would be able to break another 2 records in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. The first was comprehending the most sword principles in one visit, and the other was comprehending the most sword principles. Chapter 933. The sword light flickered, and the sword shadows condensed into a single sword. As the sword slashed out, the wind howled and thunder roared. Wind and thunder gathered and swept across the sky. Nieshinkong was forced to take 3 steps back by the sword. Junior Brother's sword art of wind and thunder is really powerful. Nieshinkong praised. That sword was the 8th move of the sword art of wind and thunder. Nieshinkong came to Chu Mu from time to time to practice with him. He was defeated every time, but his swordsmanship attainments gradually improved during the battles with Chu Mu. 5 elements swordsmanship, sword art of wind and thunder, sword art of cloud, and 8 gates swordsmanship. Chu Mu also used the intermediate sand of time. 1 grain of intermediate sand of time could last for a month, so 1 month was equivalent to 4 months. In this way, Chu Mu's swordsmanship progressed rapidly. He had practiced all of them to the 8th move, and his understanding and application of profound meanings had deepened. The worldlet of the Flying Heaven Pavilion was similar to the main world. There were changes in the weather: sunny days, rainy days, dark clouds, wind, thunder, rain, and lightning. Somewhere in the worldlet, there was a mountain covered by dark clouds. Layer by layer, the dark clouds looked like a huge piece of lead mud that was about to crush down. There was a suffocating atmosphere, as if the end of the world had come. The dull, rumbling sound echoed in the thick and low-pressure dark clouds, shaking like a rolling snowball. Traces of lightning flashed in the dark clouds, as if it wanted to break free from the shackles of the dark clouds and show the world its destructive power. The wind howled and swept wildly, as if it wanted to turn everything on the mountain into dust. A figure stood at the peak of the mountain. He held a sword in his left hand, and his right hand hung down naturally. His figure stood upright between heaven and earth, like a divine sword standing proudly, unyielding and unyielding. He raised his head and stared at the thick, dark clouds in the sky. The dark clouds were reflected in his clear eyes, as if the sky was about to collapse. This place was a corner of the worldlet of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Over the years, the sky was covered by dark clouds and thunder. Some disciples of the Flying Heaven Pavilion would also come here to meditate. This figure was Chu Mu. Other than him, there was no one else present. This was the 5th time Chu Mu had come here. In the previous 4 times, he had stayed here for 2 to 3 days each time. He released his divine remembrance and came into contact with the thick and heavy dark clouds. He could feel the violent, destructive power contained within. Every time he came into contact with it, his comprehension would gradually deepen. And now, for the 5th time, Chu Mu could vaguely feel that he had touched upon something after a day and night of continuous enlightenment. However, there was still a layer separating him from it, and it was somewhat blurry. With a rumbling sound, a red thunderbolt carrying a scorching aura broke through the thick layer of dark clouds. With a berserk and destructive might, it struck a huge piece of wood not far from Chu Mu. In an instant, the huge piece of wood shattered and a flame emerged. A gust of wind whistled past, and the flame also grew stronger. Like a firestorm, the huge piece of wood was turned into ashes in the blink of an eye. If such a terrifying power struck a person, even a divine condensation realm swordsman would be reduced to ashes in an instant. Chu Mu was not afraid in the slightest. He stared at the log that had been reduced to ashes by the firestorm and sank into deep thought. Gradually, his eyes began to shine, and in the end, a brilliant light shot out from them. "Ha ha ha ha, I understand now." Loud laughter rang out, intertwining with the sound of thunder in the sky. Immediately, waves of tyrannical power gushed out from Chu Mu's body. The purple, profound power of thunder, the white, profound power of cloud, the cyan, profound power of wind, and the red, profound power of fire. for different kinds of power entwined around Chumu's body. An incomparably sharp sword intent also gushed out, shooting straight into the sky, as if it could pierce through the dark clouds. With the sword intent as the support, the 4 profound powers attached themselves to it. Using a unique method, they condensed into lines of runes and finally poured into the sword in his hand. In the blink of an eye, Chumu pulled out the sword of no return. On the trembling sword of no return, there was a 5-colored light entwining around it. Silver was the main color, while the other 4 colors rotated like a storm. Thundercloud storm. Softly muttering these 4 words, Chumu's expression was cold and solemn. His eyes emitted an incomparably sharp light. The sword of no return was swung out. The speed of the sword was not fast, but it emitted a frightening, destructive aura. Suddenly, a rumbling sound rang out, instantly covering the sound of thunder in the thick, dark clouds in the sky. It was the only sound between heaven and earth. When the sword was drawn, a high-speed rotating storm immediately rolled out. After it left the sword, it rapidly expanded, covering a radius of several hundred meters. This terrifying storm became mainly grayish-white, with cyan, purple, and red colors intertwining within. The clouds were changing, the wind was cutting, the thunder was raging, and the fire was burning. Once the enemy was enveloped by the 4 profound powers, they would suffer a destructive attack. With a rumbling sound, thunder descended from the sky. The thundercloud storm trembled, and an even louder sound came out. Electric snakes swam, and its power increased sharply. In the small world of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, there were many mountains. Some of these mountains were high, some are low, some are big, and some are small. The unmoving mountain was the only tallest mountain in the small world of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. It towered between heaven and earth, like a crane among chickens. No other mountain could compare to it. The name of the unmoving mountain was eternally unmoving. Chumu stood in front of the unmoving mountain, like a statue eroded by time. He raised his head slightly, staring at the unmoving mountain in front of him, taking an entire mountain. His pupils reflected the complete, unmoving mountain. His breathing was very subtle, almost undetectable, and so long that it was almost non-existent. 3 days it had been 3 days. Ever since he created the first 4th-grade sword technique, the thundercloud storm, Chumu came to the unmoving mountain and stood there for 3 days and 3 nights. His posture did not change, and he did not even move his fingers or blink his eyelids. His aura was fading little by little, like smoke and fire disappearing. Gradually, his aura merged with the surrounding aura fluctuations, and gradually merged with the unmoving mountain in front of him. The mountain was that mountain, and the person was that person, but the aura gradually became the same. The person's aura merged with the aura of the mountain. Chumu seemed to have disappeared, and in his place was a mountain, a miniature version of the unmoving mountain. The mountain did not move, and the person did not move. They did not know the passage of time, the changes of the wind and clouds, and the vicissitudes of the world. At some point, a wind blew, and a few dark clouds floated in the sky. Light rain fell from the sky, falling on the unmoving mountain, on Chumu's body, and on the ground. The wind blew, and the water soaked, but the unmoving mountain was still the unmoving mountain, and Chumu was still Chumu. After the wind and rain, there seemed to be a ray of dazzling light under the light, like a rainbow crossing the sky, drawing a perfect arc. As if affected by the unmoving mountain, the reflection of a rainbow also appeared behind Chumu. The fluctuation of the person was the same as the fluctuation of the mountain. The person was like the mountain. Wisps of profound aura gradually emitted from Chumu's body. Day turned to night, and the blazing sun and moon of the small world alternated. Heaven and earth did not move, and the human heart was immortal. Chumu did not move, and a green vine sprang out from the ground under his feet. Nourished by the earth, it grew rapidly and coiled up Chumu's legs, wrapping around Chu Mu's entire body. Small flowers bloomed, and the flowers swayed in the wind. Birds flew over, chirping and buzzing. Bees buzzed and flew over, fascinated. There was no human aura, and Chu Mu became a part of nature, resonating with the unmoving mountain from afar. The sun and moon alternated, and time passed quickly. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. A month later, at the foot of the unmoving mountain, in a small place that was densely entangled by the flowering green vines, a shocking sharpness suddenly erupted. It was Swordwill. The Swordwill soared into the sky, and the flowering green vines instantly turned into powder. Subsequently, the shocking Swordwill retracted, but there was still a shocking sharpness in the air. It lasted for a full 10 breaths of time before it faded and dissipated. This was out of Chu Mu's expectations. Originally, his purpose of comprehending the unmoving mountain was only to comprehend a pure defensive sword technique. He did not expect that it would take him a month, but the time spent was worth it, because not only did he comprehend a defensive sword technique, but he also deepened the essence of the inextinguishable Swordwill. This allowed the Swordwill to last for 10 more breaths of time, which was a great improvement from before. At this point, Chu Mu had created a 4th grade offensive sword technique, Thundercloud Storm, and a 4th grade defensive sword technique, Unmoving Mountain. He had also comprehended a trace of the inextinguishable essence, which allowed the Swordwill to last for 10 more breaths of time. His strength had increased by many times compared to before. I have a 4th grade offensive sword technique and a 4th grade defensive sword technique. Next, I will create a 4th grade movement sword technique. If possible, I will also create a 4th grade defensive counterattack sword technique. Chu Mu said to himself. It had to be said that his ambition was still very big. In a spurt of energy, with the momentum of comprehending the 4th grade defensive sword technique, Unmoving Mountain, Chu Mu set off and once again wandered around the small world of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, looking for a suitable place to comprehend. Like the Thundercloud Mountain and the Unmoving Mountain, Chu Mu did not deliberately search for them, but he saw them while wandering around. His intuition told him that comprehending them would be beneficial. Chu Mu believed that his intuition was very accurate. Sure enough, comprehending the Thundercloud Mountain allowed him to create the 4th grade offensive sword technique, Thundercloud Storm. Comprehending the Unmoving Mountain allowed him to create the 4th grade defensive sword technique, Unmoving Mountain. He also comprehended a trace of the inextinguishable essence. Sometimes he would run quickly and suddenly stop at a place to look at the scenery in front of him. After 3 days and 3 nights, he would set off again. Sometimes he would run quickly, sometimes he would walk slowly, sometimes he would stop, and sometimes he would walk and stop. Every step he took, he would comprehend, and every step he took, he would comprehend. The small world was not big, but it was not small either. Divine Condensation Realm Swordsmen could not fly, while King Realm Swordsmen could. However, their speed was also greatly limited. With Chu Mu's speed, it would take him nearly a year to explore the entire small world. He would walk to the edge of the small world and then return from another path. He would walk and stop, and from time to time he would draw his sword and wave it a few times to comprehend all kinds of things. Sometimes his figure would flash, sometimes his figure would float. He was completely immersed in his personal comprehension. Until one day, Chu Mu's figure moved, turning into a bolt of lightning, streaking across the sky, containing thousands of changes, and disappeared. Chapter 934. Accompanied by wind and dust, birds chirping and flowers fragrant, the sun and moon revolving around him, rain or shine could not stop him. Chu Mu's figure moved again, instantly turning into a 4-colored rainbow, crossing the sky and rushing forward at an indescribable speed. When it encountered a huge rock, it seemed as if it was about to dissipate. In a trance, it appeared on top of the huge rock. This 4th grade movement sword skill, Shocking Rainbow, has the power of the profound meaning of wind, allowing it to fly with the wind. It has the sharpness of the profound meaning of gold, allowing it to break through the obstruction of the airflow. It has the power of the profound meaning of thunder, allowing it to break through the air like lightning. The combination of the three profound meanings of wind, metal, and thunder can release pure speed to the extreme. With the profound meaning of clouds, it can instantly change when it encounters obstacles. Standing on top of the huge rock, Chumu thought to himself. Now he had a 4th grade offensive sword skill, a 4th grade defensive sword skill, and a 4th grade movement sword skill. However, Chumu felt that it was not enough. He thought that he should have another close combat sword skill, like Wind Slayer, and a defensive counterattack sword skill would be better. However, he felt that comprehending and creating these 3 4th grade sword skills had already consumed all his accumulation. If he wanted to comprehend the 4th grade sword skill, it would be very difficult. It would require a long period of accumulation. It's time to go back. Chumu thought to himself and was about to leave. Junior brother, good movement skill. A calm voice suddenly rang out, startling Chumu. He raised his head to look at the sky, only to see a figure arrive with the wind and descend. Chumu found that he could not feel the other person's aura fluctuation. Intuition told him that the person who landed not far away was a powerful existence that he could not fight against. A head of long black hair was tied behind his head. His eyebrows were like swords, and his eyes were as bright as stars. On his face there was a faint smile. His figure was slender and gave people a feeling of elegance. It was as if he had always had this temperament since he was born. Junior brother, which courtyard are you from? His voice had a unique rhythm to it. Listening to it, one would feel that it was very pleasing to the ear. It made people want to talk to him more. This was a kind of aura. Soaring Sky Academy. Chumu was able to react. He did not feel the slightest bit of hostility from the person before him. Soaring Sky Academy? The man was a little surprised. Because of Chumu's movement technique and sword technique just now, he was able to distinguish 4 profounds. Wind profounds, gold profounds, thunder profounds, and cloud profounds. Each of them had reached the limit of the 8th revolution. Logically speaking, it should not be a disciple of the sky soaring courtyard who possessed profound meaning of this level. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind. Are you the new disciple of our flying heaven pavilion, Chumu? The man asked. That's me. Chumu nodded his head. I heard that a peerless genius came to our flying heaven pavilion. He broke the record of entering the Flying Heaven Pavilion and broke the record of comprehending the most profound meanings in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. His name is Chumu. The man immediately smiled. I'm very curious. I've always wanted to see this new junior brother. But half a year ago, when I went to the Soaring Sky Academy, junior brother Chu was not there. It turned out that he was walking in the small world to comprehend sword skills. Senior brother, you are? Chumu slightly saluted with his sword and asked, My surname is Chin. My name is Tiani. The man said with a smile. When he said, My surname is Chin, Chumu's heart skipped a beat. Subconsciously, he guessed the identity of the person in front of him. When he heard the other party say, Tiani, his heart beat wildly. That kind of surprise gushed out like a fountain. Chin Tiani, the legendary disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. During the entrance examination, he used exactly 7 minutes to break the record of the Flying Heaven Pavilion that had been maintained for thousands of years. Although his sword intent and profound meanings were only at the peak of the 8th revolution, he had comprehended 7 profound meanings, which was the highest in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. His cultivation talent had also reached the upper 2nd grade, which was the highest level in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. When he was assigned to the Flying Heaven Court, it took him less than 2 years to defeat the number 1 disciple of the Flying Heaven Court and become the chief senior brother of the Flying Heaven Court. 3 years later, his cultivation broke through, and he became the sword of Gojoseon. After entering the sky-breaking court, he continued to advance by leaps and bounds. Now he was the chief senior brother of the sky-breaking court, and his glory was unparalleled in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Not only was Qin Tianyi a legend in the Flying Heaven Pavilion, but Qin Tianyi's legend was also circulating in the Western Tiger Territory. He and the 4 other geniuses of the 4 other factions were known as the 5 Greats of the Western Tiger Territory. They were the strongest among the King Realm experts. In short, Qin Tianyi was surrounded by countless halos. Those of the same generation as him felt that being born in the same era as him was both a blessing and a sorrow. The blessing was witnessing the growth of a legend, but the sorrow was that they could only look up to him, unable to compare. So it's senior brother Qin. After recovering from his shock, Chu Mu saluted with his sword and said, "Senior brother Qin's talent is unparalleled, and you are one of the 5 greats of the Western Tiger Territory. Now that I've seen senior brother Qin's glory, you are indeed worthy of your name. I know my talent very well. You were able to break the entry test record, so your comprehension ability is not below mine. Moreover, you have comprehended 8 types of profoundness, and each of them has been refined to the limit of the 8th revolution. This alone is enough to surpass me." Qin Tianyi smiled and said, "Although your cultivation talent is only at the low 5th grade, as long as you can raise it to the 4th grade, I believe that with your talent, you will definitely become the strongest King Realm expert. It's easier said than done to raise one's cultivation talent." Chu Mu said he wasn't worried that his cultivation talent couldn't be raised because he had the heaven-seizing grand art. However, his progress was very slow. Even now, he was still at the low 5th grade, unless he plundered other people's cultivation talent, and he had to plunder a lot of it. Of course, if there was a heavenly treasure that could raise one's cultivation talent, it would work, but it had to be compatible. Heavenly treasure that could raise one's cultivation talent was just a general term. There were different grades. The higher the grade of the treasure, the more precious and rare it was. For example, treasures that could raise one's cultivation talent in the lower 3 grades were precious, but as long as one was willing, it was still possible to obtain them. However, treasures that could raise one's cultivation talent in the middle 3 grades were very rare. It was hard to say whether one could obtain them. Fortunately, he had the heaven-seizing grand art. Chu Mu sighed again. At worst, when he was stronger, he could apply to leave the small world of the Flying Heaven Pavilion and go out to gain experience. He could kill all the strong enemies and plunder their cultivation talent to improve himself. "Junior brother, it's fate that brought us together. Let me give you a gift." Qin Tianyi smiled and suddenly said. He raised his hand and something flew through the air. "Cultivate well. I hope that one day you can surpass me." As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Tianyi's figure soared into the sky like a rock spreading its wings. With a flash of sword light, he seemed to be one with the sword and disappeared into the sky on his sword. Chu Mu was sure that he did not see wrong. When Qin Tianyi left, he did leave on his sword. After Qin Tianyi left, Chu Mu looked at the thing in his hand. It was a root-like thing that looked a little like ginger. Was it ginger? Of course not. It was just a little similar in appearance. "What's this?" Puzzled, Chu Mu calmed down and searched in the memory of the alchemy grandmaster in his mind to see if he could find any record of the thing in his hand. Qin Tianyi was not an ordinary swordsman. He was one of the 5 unique swordsmen of the West Tiger sect and the most talented disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. The things he collected should not be ordinary. They might be the treasures of treasures. He searched one by one and compared them with the thing in his hand. Some medicinal materials were similar in appearance to the thing in his hand, but after careful identification, they were not the same kind. Finally, Chu Mu found a kind of medicinal material that was very similar in appearance to the thing in his hand. After careful identification according to the identification method, His heart suddenly jumped, and there was a kind of joy surging from the bottom of his heart. Heavenly Ginger was the name of the thing in his hand. The name was very ordinary, but its effect was not ordinary at all. It was also very precious. Heavenly Ginger was a kind of medicinal material. Its effect was not like other medicinal materials, which might have 2 or even 3 or 4 effects. It only had one effect, but this effect made it an extremely precious treasure. It could improve one's cultivation talent. According to the memory in his mind, Chu Mu had an intuitive understanding of Heavenly Ginger. Heavenly Ginger under 1,000 years old had no effect on improving one's cultivation talent at all. In a word, it was useless. However, Heavenly Ginger over 1,000 years old had accumulated medicinal efficacy to a certain extent and caused a qualitative change, which could improve one's cultivation talent. However, Heavenly Ginger over 1,000 years old could only improve one's cultivation talent to the 6th level at most. The older the Heavenly Ginger, the stronger the medicinal efficacy, and the better the effect. Heavenly Ginger over 2,000 years old could improve one's cultivation talent to the 5th level, while Heavenly Ginger over 3,000 years old could improve one's cultivation talent to the 4th level. Heavenly Ginger does not increase in size with age. One of the ways to identify the age of Heavenly Ginger is to look at the lines on it. A circle of lines around the whole Heavenly Ginger is 1,000 years old Heavenly Ginger. 2 circles of lines around it is a 2,000 years old Heavenly Ginger. 3 circles of lines around it is a 3,000 years old Heavenly Ginger. Chu Mu carefully identified the lines on the Heavenly Ginger in his hand and was surprised to find that there were 2 clear lines, and the 3rd line was very faint. If one did not look carefully, it would be difficult to find. This piece of Heavenly Ginger is less than 3,000 years old, but it has reached the peak of 2,000 years. Chu Mu secretly said, even if this piece of Heavenly Ginger is 2,999 years old, which is only 1 year away from 3,000 years old, it does not have the effect of a 3,000-year-old Heavenly Ginger, which is a qualitative change. What a pity! Chu Mu could not help but sigh. If it was a 3,000-year-old Heavenly Ginger, his cultivation talent could be improved to the lower 4th level. At that time, the upper limit of his cultivation would reach the limit of the Blessed Realm. For a period of time in the future, he would not need to worry about the limit of his cultivation talent. He would have more time to practice the heaven-seizing technique and more time to look for rare treasures that could improve his cultivation talent. Even if I can't improve my cultivation talent to the 4th level. As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Mu was stunned, because he found a pill formula in his memory. Chapter 935. The Great Amplification Pill was a miraculous pill refined from sky ginger, a type of medicinal herb that could increase one's cultivation talent, supplemented by several other precious medicinal herbs. Its only function was to increase the grade of one's cultivation talent. According to the pill formula, a great amplification pill refined from a 2,000-year-old sky ginger as the main ingredient and supplemented by several other precious medicinal herbs would have the same effect as a 3,000-year-old sky ginger. In other words, if Chu Mu refined this piece of sky ginger into a great amplification pill, his cultivation talent would directly increase from the current low 5th grade to low 4th grade. If that's the case, I can save the time I need to cultivate the heaven-seizing technique. However, to refine the great amplification pill, one needs to have the attainments of an alchemy grandmaster. I'm only a grandmaster, not a grandmaster. Moreover, the medicinal herbs needed to complement sky ginger are also very precious. I don't have any of them in my collection. After thinking about it, Chu Mu planned to look around the Flying Heaven Pavilion to see if he could find those medicinal herbs. At the same time, he could also find some time to improve his alchemy skills. Fortunately, the inheritance was from an alchemy grandmaster, and a peak alchemy grandmaster at that. As long as he was given some time and enough medicinal herbs, he would be able to improve his alchemy skills. As for reaching the limit of the inheritance, he would have to think about higher-level alchemy skills in the future. Chu Mu found that he seemed to be looking for trouble. In the future, alchemy would be added to his cultivation. He couldn't wait to have a clone technique or to be able to use one day as 10. Fortunately, I still have 4 grains of intermediate sand of time, Chu Mu thought to himself. Originally, most of the intermediate sand of time had been used on the time compass, leaving only 8 grains that couldn't be used on the time compass. Chu Mu had been keeping them. Previously, in order to cultivate the 5 elements sword art, wind and thunder sword art, and cloud sword art, he had used 4 of them. For grains of time, sand could be used for 4 months, which became 16 months. It greatly extended Chu Mu's cultivation time, allowing him to cultivate several sword techniques to the 8th move level. In addition to his usual accumulation and astonishing comprehension ability, as well as his comprehension while walking in the small world, he was able to create 3/4 rank sword techniques in one go. This kind of efficiency was extremely shocking. However, if one were to put everything together and think about it carefully, it was reasonable. There were still 4 mid-grade sands of time. Chu Mu could use 4 months as 16 months. He had to plan carefully on how to use this time to achieve a higher cultivation efficiency. As for the high-tier sand of time, he had a total of 13 of them. Until now, he had never used them because he did not dare to. High-grade sand of time was suitable for king-level experts. A single grain of high-grade sand of time could turn 1 month into 8 months. The effects were excellent. Chu Mu coveted it, but he didn't dare to use it. King-level powerhouses had comprehended the power of rules. Their bodies were many times stronger than those of the god condensation realm. Only with all these factors could they withstand the burden brought about by the power of the sands of time. Although Chu Mu was extremely powerful in the divine condensation realm, he still couldn't withstand the corrosion of the high-grade sand of time. Once he used it, his life foundation would definitely be greatly damaged. It was extremely disadvantageous. As for the 13 grains of high-grade sand of time, he could only keep them and find a suitable opportunity to use them after he became the sword of Gojoseon. Putting away the heavenly Jiang, Chu Mu executed his movement technique, the flying swan illusory steps. He flew through the air like a swan, leaving a wisp of smoke behind. His figure remained on the huge rock. After a few dozen breaths, it slowly dissipated. Junior brother Chu, long time no see. Junior brother Chu, you seem to be in good spirits. It seems like there's a happy occasion. On the way back to the Soaring Sky Court, he met some disciples of the Soaring Sky Court. They all greeted him. Although Chu Mu had spent most of his time cultivating after becoming a disciple of the Soaring Sky Court and rarely showed himself, he had defeated several senior disciples in succession. Even the 3rd-ranked Nieshinkong had been defeated by Zhong Mukin. Although he was defeated by Zhong Mukin in the end, Chu Mu's reputation in the Soaring Sky Court had become even more resounding. Because they were always suppressed by the Soaring Sky Court, the disciples of the Soaring Sky Court were even more united and had a better relationship with each other. Senior brothers, do you know where the chief senior brother is now? Chu Mu stopped and asked. The chief senior brother should be meditating in his sword tower, one of them replied. Junior brother Chu, why are you looking for the chief senior brother? Another person asked curiously. It's nothing important. It's just that I've made some progress in my cultivation recently, and I want to verify it with the chief senior brother, Chu Mu said. He had his reasons for saying that. Zhong Mukin was very strong and had a grade 4 sword technique. Now, Chu Mu also had a grade 4 sword technique. Moreover, after creating it, he had been perfecting it bit by bit. The battle between the two of them would definitely be very exciting. Chu Mu had already felt the unity of the Soaring Sky Court's disciples. He could also feel their friendliness and concern. Gradually, he felt a sense of belonging to the Soaring Sky Court. Although this sense of belonging was just a trace, it did not prevent Chu Mu from giving an opportunity to his fellow disciples of the Soaring Sky Court. When the disciples heard this, they were stunned at first. Then they became excited. They immediately bid farewell to Chu Mu and scattered to inform the others. Chu Mu smiled and went to Zhong Mukin's sword tower. Zhong Mukin's sword tower was built in the middle of a lake. The lake was sparkling, and fish swam in the water leisurely. Senior Brother Zhong. Standing by the lake, Chu Mu called out. His voice condensed into a line that passed through the air and landed on the seal, causing the seal to fluctuate. Not long after, a figure rushed out of the seal and walked over on the water. Junior Brother Chu. Zhong Mukin nodded and smiled. Senior Brother Zhong, I've created a grade 4 sword technique, Chu Mu said. Let's go. Zhong Mukin's eyes lit up. He sped up and headed in the direction of the 100 Battles Tower. In the soaring sky court, Zhong Mukin was the only one who had comprehended a grade 4 sword technique. He was the chief disciple in the soaring sky court and had no opponents. In the soaring sky court, he felt lonely at the top. Now, other than him, there was a second person who had comprehended a grade 4 sword technique and had enough strength to fight with him. The two of them moved quickly and soon arrived at the 100 Battles Tower. As soon as they entered, they were shocked because hundreds of gazes fell on their faces. They did not expect there to be so many people. Chief Disciple! Hundreds of people shouted in unison. Junior Brother Chu. After calling out the Chief Disciple, some people also greeted Chu Mu. The crowd automatically parted, allowing Chu Mu and Zhong Mukin to walk to the 100 Battles Tower. Junior Brother Chu, please. Zhong Mukin said and slowly drew his sword. Senior Brother Zhong, please. Chu Mu also drew his sword. The two of them exchanged glances. They did not directly use a grade 4 sword technique. Instead, they used their footwork and approached each other in the blink of an eye. In the previous battle, Zhong Mukin used a grade 4 sword technique to defeat Chu Mu. After that, the two of them did not fight. This time, they planned to use their sword techniques to fight first and let the soaring sky court's disciples watch the battle. Chu Mu's sword technique was not to be doubted. Zhong Mukin's attainments in sword technique were also not bad. In order to let the soaring sky court's disciples watch better, Chu Mu limited his sword technique to the same level as Zhong Mukin's. Sword light flickered and sword shadows circled around. It was very exciting. Every move, every style, and every sword move was very dangerous, but also very mysterious. It was like an antelope hanging its horn, a heavenly steed soaring across the sky, untraceable. The disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy were mesmerized, their eyes unblinking. Chu Mu and Zhong Mukin intended to teach the Soaring Sky Court's disciples. Therefore, the speed of their swords did not reach the extreme. It was just fast enough that the crowd could catch it. Although the speed of their swords was not fast enough, their techniques were very profound. Zhong Mukin comprehended the light sword technique, wind sword technique, thunder sword technique, and fire sword technique from the murals. The 4 sword techniques were used alternately and were very exquisite. After many years of practice, he had cultivated these 4 sword techniques to the 9th move. He had a deep understanding of them and was very proficient in them. Chu Mu comprehended the 5 elements sword technique, wind and thunder sword technique, and cloud sword technique. However, he only used the 5 elements sword technique in his battle with Zhong Mukin. So that's how it is. Sword techniques can be used in this way. Some disciples nodded subconsciously and revealed a look of realization. I understand. This battle of swordsmanship lasted for a full hour, and everyone was enthralled by it. Soon after, the two separated and retreated to a certain distance. They nodded. The atmosphere suddenly became tense. The Soaring Sky Court's disciples were all excited and their eyes were wide open. They felt that the most exciting moment was coming. The battle of sword techniques. The chief disciple, Zhong Mukin, had a 4th grade sword technique. How could Chu Mu fight against him? Could it be that Chu Mu had also comprehended a fourth-grade sword technique? Thinking of this, the disciples were surprised and even more excited. I only have one move in a fourth-grade sword technique, and it's called Light Revolving Thunder Flame Wave. Junior brother has already experienced it. Zhong Yukin said, because I only have one move. I've worked hard on it. Thundercloud Storm. This is a fourth-grade sword technique. I just created it not long ago. Chu Mu said, Senior brother, please enlighten me. Junior brother Chu has really created a fourth-grade sword technique. That's great. Junior brother Chu's sword intent and profound have been tempered to the peak of the 8th revolution. His fourth-grade sword technique must be very powerful. I don't know how powerful Junior brother Chu is with a fourth-grade sword technique. Nie Xingkong and Li Qian were also looking forward to it. They were a little excited. Well, let me see Junior brother Chu's new sword technique, Thundercloud Storm. Zhong Yukin's tone was also a little excited. Chu Mu nodded slightly and did not say anything. He was accumulating power. A fourth-grade sword technique was very powerful. It was more than 10 times stronger than a third-grade sword technique. Naturally, the consumption of energy to perform a fourth-grade sword technique was many times more than that of a third-grade sword technique. Moreover, the accumulation time to perform a fourth-grade sword technique was also longer than that of a third-grade sword technique. Only with sufficient accumulation time could the power of a fourth-grade sword technique be truly released. Chu Mu was accumulating power. Zhong Yukin was also accumulating power. The two of them were accumulating power, causing the surrounding air to gradually become oppressive. The pressure in the air was also gradually increasing. Vaguely, there was a feeling that a storm was coming, causing everyone to be unable to breathe. Chapter 936. Facing each other. On the 100 Battles platform, a terrifying storm was brewing even though there was no wind. Because of the heavy pressure, the air became viscous, the light became dim and distorted. Countless sharp lights were released from their bodies and swam in the air, creating a rustling sound. Their long robes and long hair fluttered in the wind. The Soaring Sky Academy disciples around the 100 Battle stage all widened their eyes. They couldn't take their eyes off the stage and even forgot to breathe. They were completely focused. They could feel an enormous pressure emanating from the 100 Battle stage. The source of this pressure was Chu Mu and Zhong Yukin. Junior brother, take my sword. With a long roar, for types of profound energy burst out from his body and instantly poured into the sword in his hand. Light radiated in all directions as he slashed out with his sword. With a whistling sound, the terrifying thunder flame light wave spun at high speed like a dragon coming out of the water, destroying everything. Chu Mu raised his eyelids and a sharp light shot out. The 4 types of profound energy, with sword intent as the main force, poured into the sword of no return. The sword origin was activated and the sword of no return released an astonishing light and aura. Thundercloud Storm. Chu Mu's self-created 4th-grade sword skill was displayed for the first time in front of the world. The sky darkened and the earth darkened. Thunderclouds covered the sky and strong winds blew. Raging flames covered the ground. It was a scene of destruction that made people feel extremely depressed. The terrifying 8th Revolution Sword Intent and 8th Revolution Profound made the Thundercloud Storm's power reach a terrifying level. Amidst the rumbling sounds, a thunderstorm took shape. The battle stage was a few thousand meters wide, while the thunderstorm was a few hundred meters wide. Green, purple, red, and white colors intertwined, mixing together. The disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy around the battle stage looked at the rapidly rotating thunderstorm and felt as if their gazes were being sucked into it. It was as if they could see countless lightning snakes, wind blades, and raging flames inside the thunderstorm. The terrifying feeling of destruction made their bodies tremble. Even the sword soul in their spiritual world was trembling. In an instant, the revolving thunder flame wave and the thundercloud storm collided. The revolving thunder flame wave's power was in its impact. It constantly attacked forward and defeated the opponent, while the thundercloud storm's power was in its attack, sucking the target into the storm and killing it through the terrifying rotating power of the storm. Zhong Yukin had only comprehended one grade 4 sword skill, revolving thunder flame wave. Therefore, he could only work on this one move. As he continued to study and deepen his understanding of this move, his control over this move continued to increase. This also allowed the revolving thunder flame wave to be perfected and its power to be developed continuously. There was an obvious difference between the power of a first-grade sword skill and a perfected grade sword skill. In particular, the higher the grade of a sword technique, the harder it was to perfect it. Every time it was perfected, its might would increase significantly. Zhong Yukin's radiant revolving lightning flame wave had been created for several years. Although it had not yet reached perfection, it was still greatly improved. On the other hand, Chu Mu's Thundercloud Storm was just a first-grade sword skill and was slightly perfected. It was obviously not as perfect as the revolving Thunder Flame Wave. Fortunately, his sword intent and 4 profound meanings had reached the peak of the 8th revolution, surpassing the revolving Thunder Flame Wave. Therefore, the power of the 2 sword skills was almost equal. However, when Chu Mu created the immovable mountain, he comprehended a trace of the essence of immortality, which allowed the sword intent to last for 10 breaths of time. Although it could not make the power of the sword skill last for 10 breaths of time, it could at least last for 3 breaths of time. In 3 breaths of time, the winner was decided. The revolving Thunder Flame Wave's power was constantly being consumed by the thundercloud storm. At the same time, the thundercloud storm's power was also being consumed. However, the speed of consumption was slower than the revolving Thunder Flame Wave. As the 2 great 4th rank sword techniques clashed, the 100 battle platform was surging with wind and clouds. It constantly shook and a terrifying aura surged in all directions. Chu Mu and Zhong Yukin's robes and long hair fluttered in the wind. The Soaring Sky Academy disciples below the 100 battle platform were all incomparably oppressed and were about to suffocate. In the end, the revolving Thunder Flame Wave was obliterated. The thundercloud storm was also reduced to 10 meters in size. Its power was severely weakened. After defeating the revolving Thunder Flame Wave, the thundercloud storm continued to move forward, sweeping towards Zhong Yukin. The powerful suction force caused Zhong Yukin's body to sink. Slash! With a loud roar, Zhong Yukin slashed out with his sword. 2 grade 3 sword skills collided with the weakened thunderstorm, and the 2 skills canceled each other out. Countless light dots filled the surroundings, and dust covered the entire battle stage. Everyone's eyes widened as they stared hard at the battle. When the dust dissipated, Chu Mu and Zhong Yukin's figures appeared before everyone's eyes. They were still standing in the same place. Who won? I don't know. It looks like the victor hasn't been decided yet. However, junior brother Chu can actually contend with the chief senior brother. His talent is really too shocking. At this time, Zhong Yukin opened his mouth. He smiled and nodded. There was a kind of relief, as if a heavy pressure had been lifted. Junior brother, you won. In the future, we should call you the chief senior brother. Junior brother Chu won. Wrong. You should call him the chief senior brother. Didn't you hear what senior brother Zhong said? Chief senior brother. Chief senior brother. You are now the chief senior brother of our Soaring Sky Courtyard. You bear the burden of our Soaring Sky Courtyard's long-cherished wish. Zhong Yukin said with a serious expression. That wish is to soar to the heavens in a single bound. Soar to the heavens in a single bound. Below the 100 battle stage, the disciples of the Soaring Sky Courtyard shouted in unison. This was their wish. the wish of every disciple of the soaring sky courtyard. However, they had never been able to realize it. Now they saw hope. They saw the hope of soaring to the heavens in a single bound from a new disciple, and that was Chu Mu. Their burning gazes and hearts filled with hope made Chu Mu's blood boil. Brothers, as the chief disciple, I bear the burden of the soaring sky courtyard's wish to soar to the heavens in a single bound. Within a year, I will go to the flat sky courtyard and sweep it clean. Chu Mu solemnly said, as if he was making a solemn vow. Good, ha ha ha. Zhong Nukin laughed. In his laughter, it was as if he had put down a burden, instantly becoming relaxed. Indeed, after becoming the chief disciple of the soaring sky courtyard, Zhong Nukin had been cultivating nonstop. He worked hard to strengthen himself, hoping to soar to the heavens in a single bound. However, due to the limitations of his talent, his strength was limited. His wish to soar to the heavens in a single bound had never been realized. Although he couldn't achieve it, he couldn't give up. It accumulated in his heart and gradually became a burden, a pressure. Sometimes, it was so heavy that he couldn't breathe. However, he had to bear it. It was a kind of responsibility. Now, there was finally someone in the soaring sky courtyard who had surpassed him. Moreover, it was a disciple whose soared intent had reached the peak of the 8th revolution. His shocking comprehension allowed his strength to reach the peak. He wasn't the slightest bit inferior to the soaring sky courtyard's disciples. It was indeed possible for him to soar to the heavens in a single bound. The soaring sky courtyard's disciples all laughed. The new disciples couldn't understand the feelings of the old disciples when they first arrived, but after a year, they gradually felt the same way. Senior brother Chu, let's drink. Zhong Nukin said. Chief senior brother Zhong, let's drink. Below the 100 battle stage, a disciple shouted. Wait. Chu Mu was the calmest, but his tone still revealed a trace of excitement. Right now, he was the chief senior brother. Every word and action of his had great appeal. Everyone quieted down and focused their gazes on Chu Mu. They waited for Chu Mu to continue. Now is not the time to drink. I promise that I will sweep through the flat sky courtyard within a year. So we have to drink. After I sweep through the flat sky courtyard and fulfill the wish of our soaring sky courtyard, we can drink then. It's a joyous wine and we can get drunk. Chu Mu said. All right, we'll do as chief senior brother says. Zhong Nukin also said. All right, then we'll wait. Chief senior brother, don't make us wait too long. The disciples all joked. And let's disperse. I hope that today's battle between senior brother Zhong and I will be of help to all of you. Chu Mu still called Zhong Nukin senior brother. This was a kind of respect that came from the bottom of his heart. Many thanks, chief senior brother. Many thanks, senior brother Zhong. The disciples all saluted with their swords. I've gained a lot. I'll go back and enter seclusion for a few days to properly absorb it. Me too. If we can frequently see such battles, I believe our strength will quickly increase. Amidst the discussion, the soaring sky courtyard's disciples all turned and left. Chu Mu and Zhong Nukin also jumped off the 100 Battles platform and walked out of the 100 Battles tower. Senior brother Chu, your thundercloud storm is much stronger than my revolving lightning flame ripple. Once it's perfected, it will definitely be even stronger, said Zhong Nukin. That's why I said within a year. I'm planning to spend a few months studying it and further perfecting it. At that time, I'll have more confidence in sweeping through the flat sky courtyard, said Chu Mu with a smile. With senior brother Chu's current strength, you can defeat Chao Qingfeng, one of the 3 strongest people in the flat sky courtyard. Tao Shixiang, who is ranked 2nd, is stronger than me. However, it won't be easy for him to defeat me. I believe senior brother Chu will definitely be able to defeat him. The only obstacle is the chief disciple of the flat sky courtyard, Xiao Ling, said Zhong Nukin with a grave tone. Xiao Ling, how's his sword technique? Asked Chu Mu. Only by knowing one's enemy and oneself would one be able to win 100 battles. His strongest sword technique is also a grade 4 sword technique. It seems to consist of 2 moves, said Zhong Nukin. Zhong Nukin said, Xiao Ling's grasp of grade 4 sword techniques is superior to mine. He only needs a single move to defeat me. Thus, he's a very powerful opponent, and he's also the greatest obstacle to you sweeping through the flat sky court. Senior brother Zhong, don't worry. I won't make a move unless I'm completely confident. Chu Mu smiled. The moment I decided to make a move, it means that I'm completely confident in defeating Xiaoling and sweeping through the flat sky courtyard. All right, I've already waited for so many years. 1 more year won't make a difference. Zhong Nukin smiled. During this period of time, if you need me to spar with you, Senior brother Chu, feel free to ask. All right, said Chu Mu with a smile. Sometimes having a sparring partner could improve one's sword technique further. The two chatted and laughed as they walked. Then, they returned to the sword tower to cultivate. Chapter 937. The message that Tiankia had sent to Chu Mu finally arrived. Xuanji Wuyue, Xuanji Wudao's sister. After knowing, Chu Mu remembered this information, but he did not care too much. Thunderstorm. Zhong Nukin waved his sword, and there was a rumbling sound. A terrible tornado raged. Zhong Nukin's face was dignified, and he used the revolving thunder flame wave to resist. Under the confrontation, the 2 4th-grade sword skills were constantly worn down. Finally, the revolving thunder flame wave disappeared first, and the weakened thunderstorm rushed to Zhong Nukin, but was offset by Zhong Nukin's 2nd-grade sword skill. This was in Chu Mu's stone tower. The seal of the stone tower could indeed resist the bombardment of the thunderstorm, but the floors would be destroyed. Therefore, Chu Mu did not inject the sword origin into the thunderstorm, and even controlled the sword will and the 4 profound meanings at the level of the 5th revolution. He only released the will of the thunderstorm, and it seemed that the sky was dark. Similarly, Zhong Nukin also controlled the power of the revolving thunder flame wave, and it was similar to the thunderstorm in all aspects. Under the confrontation, the power was equal, but Chu Mu's sword will had a trace of immortality, so it was still better in the end. Senior brother Chu, your understanding and mastery of 4th-grade sword skills has caught up with me. Zhong Nukin sighed. What was a genius? This was a genius, standing in front of him alive. He had spent several years continuously refining and refining the revolving lightning flame wave, perfecting it to this stage. But this person in front of him had only spent 3 months to achieve the same level of mastery and control of a 4th-grade sword skill as him. Without senior brother Zhong's help, I'm afraid that I would have to spend twice the time. Chu Mu smiled. This was the truth. In the past 3 months, he had fought with Zhong Nukin every few days. In order not to destroy the stone tower, they did not inject the sword origin, and only used the will of the sword skill to fight. In this way, they constantly deepened their understanding and mastery of the thunderstorm. Every few days, Chu Mu's sword intent contained a trace of the inextinguishable essence, allowing his sword technique to last for 3 more breaths of time. After so many confrontations, Zhong Nukin had also gained some insights, allowing his control of the revolving thunder flame wave to become deeper and more perfect. Its power became more condensed, the speed of its rotation increased, and the force of its impact also became stronger. In terms of mastering the thunderstorm, I can no longer provide you with any help. Zhong Nukin sighed. His tone was very complicated, happy, and sad. Although senior brother Zhong can't help me with the cloud storm, he can still help me with other 4th-grade sword skills. Chu Mu smiled. Other grade 4 sword skills. Could it be? Zhong Nukin's face was filled with shock. His eyes widened as he stared at Chu Mu, his fingers trembling. Could it be that you have a 2nd-grade sword skill? This idea made Zhong Nukin very shocked. It had been 1 year and 3 months since Chumu became a disciple of the Soaring Sky Academy. It was 3 months ago that he became the chief senior brother of the Soaring Sky Academy. In other words, within 1 year of becoming a disciple of the Soaring Sky Academy, Chumu had created a 4th-grade sword skill. Although this speed did not break the record of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, it could still be ranked in the top 10. Within 1 year, it seemed that only senior brother Qintiani had created 2 4th-grade sword skills. Excited, he was very excited. Chumu was once again comparable to senior brother Qintiani in a certain aspect. If he knew that Chumu didn't actually create 2 4th-rank sword techniques in a year, but 3, he would probably faint from fright. Your second 4th-grade sword skill, what is it? After a while, Zhong Yukin asked. It's a sword skill that is purely defensive. Chumu said, Next, senior brother Zhong, you use all your strength to attack me with the flame-revolving lightning wave, and I will use a 4th-grade defensive sword skill to defend. I will deepen my comprehension while defending. Okay, Zhong Yukin hurriedly said. He gathered his strength and attacked with a flame-revolving lightning wave again. With a sharp whistling sound, it rushed out. The space seemed to shatter, and the entire sword tower trembled. Chumu stood straight and held the sword hilt with both hands. His entire body was like a sharp sword that pierced the sky. Various types of profound power surged out from his body and surrounded the surroundings. Man and sword became one. In an instant, in Zhong Yukin's eyes, Chumu seemed to have become a mountain, an ancient mountain, an immovable mountain. 4th-grade defensive sword skill, immovable mountain, steady, hard, and unshakable, allowing the powerful revolving light thunder flame wave to endlessly attack him. Chumu's body didn't move in the slightest. He was like a mountain, eternal and unbreakable. When the power of the flame-revolving lightning wave was exhausted, Chumu's figure swayed and retreated 3 steps. What a strong defensive sword skill! Zhong Yukin was stunned. The sword master attacked. Therefore, it was easier to create offensive sword skills than defensive sword skills. As a result, defensive sword skills were more precious than offensive sword skills. Similarly, defensive sword skills of the same grade could often withstand the attacks of most offensive sword skills without breaking, unless it was a very strong offensive sword skill. The flame-revolving lightning wave was very powerful, but it still could not break through a movable mountain. After all, Chumu's defensive sword technique had just been created, and it wasn't perfect yet. On the other hand, revolving thunder flame wave's perfection level far surpassed immovable mountain. When immovable mountain's perfection level reached revolving thunder flame wave's level, revolving thunder flame wave wouldn't be able to do anything. Executing a grade 4 sword technique consumed a lot of sword origin and spiritual sense. The previous confrontation had already consumed a lot of sword origin and spiritual sense, so the two of them quickly recovered. After recovering, Zhong Yukin continued to use the flame-revolving lightning wave to attack, while Chumu used immovable mountain to defend. Time after time, the comprehension of a movable mountain deepened little by little. Chumu gained a lot, but so did Zhong Yukin. After that, every 5 days or so, Zhong Yukin took the initiative to come to the stone tower to find Chumu. He used 1 day to fight, and then returned to his own sword tower to comprehend and absorb. Chumu also took the opportunity to constantly modify and strengthen. In the span of 5 days, other than the comprehension of the defensive sword skill, immovable mountain, he did not fall behind in his comprehension of thunderstorm. He also performed shocking rainbow a few times. Although his progress was the slowest, it was still gradually improving. Day after day passed, and the 3 4th-grade sword skills were gradually perfected and refined. Chumu still had not used the intermediate sand of time. He planned to first perfect the 3 4th-grade sword skills. After reaching a certain level, he would go to the Flat Sky Academy to challenge them. After sweeping through the Flat Sky Academy, he would fulfill the Soaring Sky Academy's wish to soar. After that, he would calm down and use the intermediate span of time to properly improve his alchemy skills. On the 4th month, Zhongnyuken used the flame-revolving lightning wave again in the stone tower. This time, the flame-revolving lightning wave was even more condensed and spun faster. Its might was even stronger. The air seemed to be pierced, leaving behind faint marks. The terrifying impact blasted Chu Mu's body. However, Chu Mu seemed to have turned into a towering mountain, immovable and unbreakable. An incomparably sharp sound whistled out from the collision. Countless sparks, like fireworks on a summer night, shot out in all directions. Chu Mu's body did not move at all. He held his sword vertically in front of him with both hands. His eyes did not blink. His aura fused with the sword in his hand, turning into an ancient sword mountain. After the flame-revolving lightning wave's final attack, Chu Mu's body inevitably swayed. His feet swayed, and he almost took a step back. Even so, it was a clear improvement compared to the 3 steps he took a month ago. One had to know that while Chu Mu's sword skills were improving and perfecting, Zhongyuken's sword skills were also improving. Although the progress was not as fast as Chu Mu's, it was still improving. Most importantly, Zhongyuken only had 1 4th-grade sword skill. He could only use this sword skill once. After using it again and again, it would become more profound. Senior brother Chu, your defensive sword skill has become even more perfect, Zhongyuken said with a smile and a sigh of admiration. Being able to make such progress is inseparable from senior brother Zhong's help. Chu Mu also said with a smile. In the 5th month, Zhongyuken and Chu Mu still stood opposite each other in the stone tower. The same 4th-grade sword skill, flame-revolving lightning wave, was once again displayed from the sword. The sound was extremely sharp. In front of the flame-revolving lightning wave, there was an all-shaped tip, rotating at a high speed like a drill. Chu Mu's eyes flashed with a shocking cold light. He held his sword vertically in front of him. The profound meaning of the sword condensed and gushed out. He was one with the sword, as immovable as a mountain. He seemed to have turned into an ancient mountain, towering and immovable. The flame-revolving lightning wave once again struck Chu Mu's body. The shocking collision produced a terrifying whistling sound. The immovable as a mountain blocked the impact of the flame-revolving lightning wave, causing the flame-revolving lightning wave to shatter. Even when the power of the flame-revolving lightning wave was exhausted, Chu Mu's body only swayed slightly, but he did not retreat at all. Again, Chu Mu's voice was low, as heavy as a mountain. Zhongyuken nodded. He understood Chu Mu's intention. He wanted to test the limit of the defensive sword skill, immovable as a mountain, to see how many 4th-grade sword skills it could withstand. Once again, the flame-revolving lightning wave was displayed. Once again, it was blocked by immovable as a mountain. Chu Mu's body swayed slightly, but he still did not retreat. Then, Zhongyuken attacked for the 3rd time. Another flame-revolving lightning wave was released. Under the 3rd flame-revolving lightning wave, Chu Mu's body clearly swayed. With a serious face, he held the no-return sword with both hands and used immovable as a mountain to resist the impact. When the power of the flame-revolving lightning wave was exhausted, Chu Mu's body also stopped swaying. The defensive power on his body had also been reduced by more than half. Now, the defensive power of immovable as a mountain could only withstand 3 ordinary 4th-grade sword skills. After the 4th move, it would be broken and he would be injured. However, there was still time. He could continue to improve. The 6th month, which was also half a year after Chu Mu became the chief senior brother. Senior brother Chu, my flame-revolving lightning wave is only a step away from perfection. Its power is much stronger than before. You have to be careful. Zhongyuken said. Come on. Chu Mu said. The whistling sound was the first to sound. Before the sword skill was displayed, a strange phenomenon was born. With a slash of the sword, the light revolving thunder flame wave shook the heavens and earth. It looked smaller than before, but its speed was even faster. Its spinning speed was even faster, and its power was even more concentrated. Its might had clearly increased by a lot. As for Chu Mu's immovable mountain, he similarly didn't remain in place. Chapter 938. The revolving lightning flame ripple's attack could not move Shaoqin. In the end, it dissipated. Senior brother's improvement in half a year is simply too great. Zhong Mukin sighed sincerely. No matter how much his revolving lightning flame ripple improved, it was still inferior to Chu Mu's. It's time, Chu Mu said with a smile. Zhong Mukin was stunned at first. Then, he revealed an expression of wild joy. He was extremely excited as he took a deep breath. I'll go with you, Zhong Mukin said seriously. The two of them formed hand seals and left. Then they notified Nieshinkong. They did not deliberately suppress the news. Soon, all the disciples of the Sky Soaring Academy learned that Chu Mu was leaving for the Sky Soaring Academy. They all wanted to go with Chu Mu to the Sky Soaring Academy. However, there were too many people. Hence, they chose a small portion of them to go with Chu Mu and cheer him on. At the entrance of the Sky Soaring Academy, the disciples of the Sky Soaring Academy stared at Chu Mu and the others excitedly. Chief Senior Brother swept through the Sky Soaring Academy. Senior Brother Chu, let the people of the Sky Soaring Academy know the might of our Sky Soaring Academy. Let's hold our heads high. Senior Brother, you have to cheer for Chief Senior Brother. You can't lose to the people of the Sky Soaring Academy in terms of momentum. Junior brothers, don't worry. Although we are not as strong as those arrogant fellows of the Sky Soaring Academy, we definitely won't lose to them in terms of momentum. Senior brothers, just wait here for the good news, Chu Mu said with a smile. Then he turned around and left with large strides. Zhong Mukin, Li Qian, Nieshinkong, and 30 of the stronger senior disciples of the Sky Soaring Academy followed him. The group was majestic and their momentum Jintian. The Sky Soaring Academy was not far from the Sky Soaring Academy. Everyone used their movement techniques to rush forward. After half an hour, they entered the Sky Soaring Academy's territory. When the Sky Soaring Academy's disciples saw the 30-odd people of the Sky Soaring Academy, they were startled. Stop! A few disciples of the Flat Sky Academy strode over and blocked the path ahead. They swept their gazes around, looking somewhat arrogant. Chu Mu only glanced at them. His eyes shone with a cold light, causing the disciples of the Heaven Leveling Academy to tremble. They felt as if their souls were trembling. His footsteps did not stop, and he continued forward, not paying any attention to the stunned disciples of the Heaven Leveling Academy. Their target was the 100 Battles Tower. Inside the 100 Battles Tower, there were a dozen or so disciples fighting on the 100 Battles platform. When the 30 or so disciples charged into the 100 Battles Tower, they immediately alerted the dozen or so disciples in the 100 Battles Tower. They are from the Soaring Sky Court. Why have they come to our Flat Sky Court? Hey, what are you guys doing here? From the looks of it, could it be that you want to challenge us? The disciples of the Fair Sky Academy spoke one after another. After they finished speaking, they all burst into laughter. Their expressions were filled with disdain and contempt. Humph, you're right. We've come here to challenge you. An old disciple of the Soaring Sky Academy stuck out his chest and said, Challenge? Their voices became louder. Did we hear wrongly? The Soaring Sky Court actually dares to challenge our Flat Sky Court? Is the sun of the ancient world going to rise from the west? As they spoke, the disciples of the Fair Sky Court laughed without the slightest restraint. As for Chu Mu and the others, they did not say a word. Their gazes were indifferent, as if they were looking at a group of idiots. When the disciples of the Fair Sky Court finished laughing, Nia Shinkong leaped onto the 100 Battles platform and said, Could it be that only you can challenge our Soaring Sky Court, but we can't challenge you? Come, I'm right here. Who dares to come up and fight me? After saying that, Nyashinkong unsheathed his sword light. A melodious sound rang out, and a bright sword light streaked through the air, leaving behind a cold afterimage as it pointed at one of the two disciples on the 100 Battles platform. You! Nyashinkong pointed his sword at the other person. You again! On the 100 Battles platform, the two disciples of the Fair Sky Court were infuriated. I'll teach you a lesson and let you know how powerful I am, one of them said angrily. 10,000 high-grade eyes and 100 flying points, Nyashinkong said coldly. Chu Mu and the others did not stop him. This time, challenging the Fair Sky Court was not something that only Chu Mu could do. As long as they were strong enough, they could do it. Nyashinkong took the lead and attacked first. As soon as he attacked, Nyashinkong erupted with his full strength. He wanted to defeat his opponent with absolute strength and give the Soaring Sky Court a good start. In a spurt of energy, his aura was like a rainbow, and his sword was fierce and fierce. Under Nyashinkong's sword skill, the Fair Sky Court's disciple did not last long before he was defeated. Who else? Nyashinkong obtained 10,000 high-grade origin crystals and 100 flying points. He raised his sword, and his aura surged. His sharp gaze swept across the other disciples of the Fair Sky Court. I'll go. The second disciple of the Fair Sky Court went up the stage. He immediately erupted with his full strength, wanting to defeat Nyashinkong. Nyashinkong also erupted with his full strength, carrying the might of defeating a strong opponent as he fought fiercely with his opponent. Nyashinkong continuously used grade 3 sword skills, and like a torrent, he charged forward and defeated his opponent. Who else wants to fight me? Nyashinkong waved his sword again, his aura surging like a rainbow. The third disciple of the Fair Sky Court went up the stage. He was indeed a strong opponent with tyrannical strength. After an intense battle, Nyashinkong exhausted all his strength and barely defeated him. Junior brother Nya, it's my turn, Li Qian said as he leaped up and landed on the stage. Okay. Nyashinkong understood Li Qian's meaning. After 3 battles, he had exhausted most of his strength. If he fought again, he would only be defeated by the Fair Sky Court's disciple. In that case, the momentum of 3 consecutive victories would be destroyed. Now, who will be my opponent? Li Qian raised his brows and asked. Zhong Nyukin, Li Qian, and Nyashinkong were originally the 3 strongest disciples of the Soaring Sky Court. Therefore, the Fair Sky Court's disciples also recognized them. I'll go find Senior Brother Chao and the others. One of the Fair Sky Court's disciples said in a low voice and quickly turned to leave. Another disciple flew over and landed in front of Li Qian. He stared at Li Qian and sneered, I'll defeat you. Okay. Li Qian also smiled. The moment he attacked, he didn't test the waters. Instead, he directly used his strength. Li Qian's strength wasn't as strong as Zhong Nyukin, but he was stronger than Nyashinkong. Although the Fair Sky Court's disciples were more talented than the Soaring Sky Court's disciples, there weren't many of them who could comprehend a grade 4 sword skill. From this, one could see how difficult it was to comprehend a grade 4 sword skill. As the third disciple of the Soaring Sky Court, Li Qian's strength was unquestionable. After defeating his opponent in an even more violent manner than Nyashinkong, he went on to challenge the second one. Good job, Senior Brother Li. Senior Brother Li is really powerful. After defeating 3 people in a row, the Soaring Sky Court's disciples' aura became even stronger. They all shouted excitedly, Junior Brother Li, it's my turn. Zhong Nyukin said. Yes, it's Senior Brother Zhong's turn. Li Qian calmly leaped down. He had exhausted a lot of his strength, so he still wasn't confident in defeating his 4th opponent. Chu Mu hadn't said anything. He was the strongest, so it wasn't time for him to make a move. It's Zhong Nyukin. This is bad. Zhong Nyukin is very strong. Only senior brother Tao and the chief senior brother can defeat him. We're not Zhong Mukin's match. What should we do? Zhong Mukin stood tall on the 100 battle stage. He didn't say anything, but everyone could clearly see a trace of provocation in his expression. Zhong Mukin was usually a mild-tempered person, but right now he was very emotional. His inner thoughts were naturally revealed. After a long while, when no one dared to challenge him, Zhong Mukin said, "Could it be that no one dares to fight me in this big flat sky court?" That's right. No matter what, the flat sky court's disciples are more talented than our soaring sky court's disciples. Yet they don't dare to fight our soaring sky court's disciples. Where's your usual awe-inspiring attitude? The 30 old disciples of the soaring sky court started mocking Zhong Mukin, causing the faces of the flat sky court's disciples to turn red. However, they still didn't dare to challenge Zhong Mukin. After all, Zhong Mukin had a grade 4 sword technique. Who says there's no one in my flat sky court? Don't think that you're amazing just because you have a grade 4 sword technique. Zhong Mukin, I'm not afraid of you. A shout came from outside. When the last word was said, a figure flew over and landed on the 100 battle stage, directly facing Zhong Mukin. Zhong Mukin, I admit that a grade 4 sword skill is very powerful. However, do you dare to fight me without using a grade 4 sword skill? Otherwise, I won't be convinced even if I lose. The Heaven's Fair Academy's disciple raised his brows as he spoke. Shameless. Truly shameless. You actually want senior brother Zhong to not use a grade 4 sword technique? What a nice way to put it. If you have the ability, then don't use a sword. The soaring sky court's disciples were furious when they heard that. However, that person's face was very thick. He acted as if he hadn't heard anything. He continued to stare at Zhong Mukin and sneered. Zhong Mukin, you should know that my talent is above yours. One day, I will also comprehend a grade 4 sword technique. Moreover, I have comprehended 5 profound meanings. I have the chance to comprehend a grade 5 sword technique, but you don't. What does what you said have to do with me not using a grade 4 sword technique? Asked Zhong Mukin. It doesn't matter if it has anything to do with you or not. I'm just telling you that you're stronger than me because you have a grade 4 sword technique. However, my future is brighter than yours. The flat sky court's disciple snorted. Answer me clearly. Do you dare to fight me without a grade 4 sword technique? If you don't dare, then take your soaring sky court's disciples and scram out of the flat sky court. If you don't dare, then scram out of the flat sky court. The dozen or so disciples of the flat sky court immediately shouted. The flat sky court's disciples seemed to have found a way to vent their anger. Although it wasn't very glorious, their hearts were filled with anger at this moment. Fine, I won't use a grade 4 sword technique. Open your eyes and watch carefully as I defeat you, said Zhong Mukin calmly. All right, I'll watch carefully. The flat sky court's disciple immediately laughed when he heard Zhong Mukin's reply. He felt that Zhong Mukin wouldn't be his opponent if he didn't use a grade 4 sword technique. Chapter 939. Zhong Mukin had comprehended 4 kinds of profundities, and all of them had been refined to the middle stage of the 8th revolution. As for his opponent, he had comprehended 5 kinds of profundities, and all of them had been refined to the late stage of the 8th revolution. Therefore, he had reason to believe that under the condition that Zhong Mukin did not use a grade 4 sword skill and only used a grade 3 sword skill or below, he could definitely defeat Zhong Mukin. Zhong Mukin had a relaxed expression on his face, as if he didn't feel the slightest burden. Soon, you won't be able to smile anymore, his opponent thought to himself. Zhong Mukin's expression didn't change as he thought to himself. In terms of sword intent, profundities, and cultivation talent, I'm indeed inferior to you. However, I can comprehend a grade 4 sword skill in the same amount of time, but you can't. My comprehension ability is higher than yours, and my mastery of grade 3 sword skills is also higher than yours. It's enough to make up for the difference in strength. He attacked with his sword. As soon as he attacked, Chumu could tell that Zhong Yukin's mastery of grade 3 sword skills was higher than his opponent's. That's right. After fighting with Chumu for half a year, Zhong Yukin had been constantly perfecting his grade 4 sword skills. The difficulty of controlling a grade 4 sword skill was far greater than a grade 3 sword skill. Since he could perfect a grade 4 sword skill to a near-perfect level, it wouldn't be difficult for him to master a grade 3 sword skill. The facts proved that Zhong Yukin's strength was still tyrannical even without using a grade 4 sword skill. He wasn't someone that any random person could contend against. Zhong Yukin's opponent's expression turned gloomy. He was too ashamed. Zhong Yukin had defeated him without using a grade 4 sword skill. He simply didn't have the face to continue staying here. As for the Flat Sky Academy's disciples around the 100 Battles platform, their mouths were wide open in disbelief. Oh, what a rare guest! Is this the first time someone from the Soaring Sky Academy has come to our Flat Sky Academy? At this moment, a mocking voice rang out. Niexing Kong, even a loser like you has come. Niexing Kong's expression changed when he heard this. However, it soon returned to normal and a cold smile appeared on his face. The person who had arrived was Chao Qingfeng, and Tao Shixiang was accompanying him. As for the head disciple of the Flat Sky Academy, Xiaoling, it seemed like he hadn't appeared yet. Zhong Yukin, your strength is indeed slightly stronger than before. However, you're far too naive if you think that you can rely on this to challenge our Fair Sky Academy. Tao Shixiang looked at Zhong Yukin on the battle platform and sneered. Zhong Yukin had been defeated by his sword many times. He was qualified to say such words to someone who had been defeated by his sword. The news of Chu Mu defeating Zhong Yukin and becoming the chief disciple of the Sky Soaring Academy had been sealed by the disciples of the Sky Soaring Academy. Therefore, other than the disciples of the Sky Soaring Academy, no one else knew about it. They all thought that Zhong Yukin was the chief disciple of the Sky Soaring Academy, the strongest person. This was because Zhong Yukin had been defeated by Tao Shixiang many times. Although he didn't understand why the Soaring Sky Academy's disciples, who had always been bullied, dared to challenge the 100 Battles Tower of the Flat Sky Academy. Since Zhong Yukin was the strongest, there was no need for Xiaoling to make a move. Tao Shixiang was more than enough to deal with any situation. Tao Shixiang also thought so. Indeed, Zhong Yukin's talent wasn't bad. During this period of time, his strength had increased a lot. However, he didn't stay stagnant. Niexing Kong, do you want to come up and play again? Chao Qingfeng looked at Niexing Kong and provoked him maliciously. Niexing Kong glanced at Chao Qingfeng, but he didn't say anything. He was expressionless. He knew that today's main character was Chumu. Chao Qingfeng, if your hands are itchy, come up. I'll fight with you. Zhong Yukin's indifferent voice sounded. Chao Qingfeng's expression changed. He could indeed defeat Niexing Kong and even Li Qian, but he wasn't a match for Zhong Yukin. Go, Tao Shixiang said. Okay. Chao Qingfeng nodded. He turned around and landed on the battle platform facing Zhong Yukin. Just in time. I'll let you taste the power of the grade 4 sword skill I just comprehended. A grade 4 sword skill. Senior brother Chao also comprehended a grade 4 sword skill. Great. Our Fair Sky Academy's overall strength has become stronger. The Fair Sky Academy's disciples shouted and waved their hands excitedly. The difficulty of comprehending a grade 4 sword skill was more than 10 times that of a grade 3 sword skill. In the entire Fair Sky Academy, only the chief disciple Xiaoling and second disciple Tao Shixiang had comprehended a grade 4 sword skill. Now, Chao Qingfeng had also comprehended a grade 4 sword skill. Since that's the case, use your grade 4 sword skill to fight against me, Zhong Yukin said. He waved his sword mercilessly. All kinds of lights intertwined on the sword and condensed into one, shooting out with the sword. Revolving lightning flame wave. The terrifying shock wave caused the space in the battle platform to creak, as if it was about to break. Chao Qingfeng's expression changed greatly. Tao Shixiang's expression also changed. He never imagined that Zhong Yukin's mastery of a grade 4 sword skill had reached such a high level. Tao Shixiang was apprehensive. Gritting his teeth, Chao Qingfeng also slashed out with his grade 4 sword skill after accumulating power. Compared to Zhong Yukin's grade 4 sword skill, Chao Qingfeng's grade 4 sword skill was like a toddler who had just learned how to walk compared to an energetic youth who had matured for 18 years. The difference between the two was obvious. Even though Chao Qingfeng's sword intent and profound had been refined to the late stage of the 8th revolution, surpassing Zhong Yukin, there was still a huge gap between their mastery and perfection of their sword skills. As a result, Chao Qingfeng's sword skill was the first to be defeated. Chao Qingfeng didn't admit defeat. He used his grade 3 sword skill to disperse the shock wave of the revolving lightning flame wave and used his movement technique to move rapidly. At the same time, he also used his grade 3 sword skill in an attempt to defeat Zhong Yukin. However, the difference in strength wasn't that easy to overcome. Chao Qingfeng was still defeated and obediently handed over 10,000 high-grade origin crystals and 100 flying points. Good job, Senior Brother Zhong. The Soaring Sky Academy's disciples shouted. Senior Brother Zhong? Tao Shixiang frowned slightly. Normally, the chief disciples of Academy would call him Senior Brother. Only a few people who had a good relationship with him would call him Senior Brother Zhong. Tao Shixiang didn't think too much about the current situation because Chao Qingfeng had been defeated. Chao Qingfeng's defeat was within his expectations, but Zhong Yukin's grade 4 sword skill had actually reached such perfection. Even if your grade 4 sword skill has reached perfection, you still won't be my opponent, Tao Shixiang thought. After Chao Qingfeng came down, he immediately jumped onto the stage to fight Zhong Yukin. Zhong Yukin, I've defeated you so many times. This time I'll defeat you too. When the time comes, you better think about how you're going to get out of the academy. Tao Shixiang's tone was overbearing. Defeat me first. Zhong Yukin didn't mind and faintly smiled. All right, take my move. Tao Shixiang waved his sword and sword light surrounded his body. In the blink of an eye, it condensed into a resplendent giant sword that appeared out of nowhere and slashed down. An intense sharpness gathered in the giant sword, and it seemed like the 100 battle stage was about to be split apart. Zhong Yukin's face was solemn as he used light revolving lightning flame wave and slashed his sword at Tao Shixiang. The 2 grade 4 sword skills instantly expanded and a terrifying power erupted. The shockwaves wreaked havoc in all directions, and the 100 battle stage's barrier creaked as if it couldn't withstand the power and was about to shatter. Different colored lights crazily swept out, and under the huge power, Zhong Yukin and Tao Shixiang's figures swayed. Tao Shixiang hurriedly steadied himself. Once again, a powerful aura gushed out from his body and soared into the sky. The 4 profound meanings and the sword intent intertwined and condensed into one, pouring into the sword as he slashed out. A rumbling sound rang out as violent waves surged out, drowning the 100 battle stage. It was like a flood that broke through a dam, like a tsunami that wanted to destroy everything. Tao Shixiang's 2nd grade 4 sword skill. Tao Shixiang actually comprehended a 2nd grade 4 sword skill. In Zhong Yukin's impression, Tao Shixiang only had a single grade 4 sword skill. He didn't expect that his strength would increase in a single year. Tao Shixiang's improvement wasn't any slower than his, especially since Tao Shixiang had comprehended a 2nd grade 4 sword skill. The huge wave was enough to destroy everything in its path. Zhong Yukin couldn't dodge and was hit. The invisible barrier around his body blocked the impact of the grade 4 sword skill, but it was also destroyed. When the huge wave dissipated, the 100 battles stage remained unscathed. I've said it before. You're a loser under my sword. It was so in the past, now, and in the future. Tao Shixiang sheathed his sword and coldly snorted at Zhong Yukin. Zhong Yukin didn't have the slightest bit of dejection on his face. With a faint smile, he sheathed his sword and took out 10,000 high-grade origin crystals and 100 flying points, handing them over to Tao Shixiang. Scram out of the flat sky courtyard. Chow! Qing Feng suddenly shouted. Scram out of the flat sky courtyard. The flat sky courtyard's disciples immediately echoed Chao Qingfeng's words. Their imposing manner caused the soaring sky courtyard's disciples' expressions to change. Tao Shixiang, although you've defeated me, today's main character isn't me, said Zhong Yukin with a smile. It's not you. Tao Shixiang's gaze narrowed as he swept his gaze over the 30 soaring sky courtyard's disciples. Could it be that there's someone stronger than you in your soaring sky courtyard? You'll find out soon enough. Zhong Yukin smiled. His figure flickered and streaked across the sky, appearing in front of the soaring sky courtyard's disciples. He greeted Chu Mu with his sword. Senior brother Chu Mu, it's time for you to make a move. Whether or not our soaring sky courtyard's wish will be realized depends on the sword in your hand. Chief Senior Brother, it's time for you to make a move. The other Soaring Sky Academy disciples also turned around and gave Chu Mu a sword salute. They spoke in unison, working together as one. Chief Senior Brother. The Soaring Sky Courtyard's disciples' expressions changed. They didn't know how to react. He's Chu Mu. Suddenly, someone shouted, Chu Mu. He's the cultivation trash whose cultivation talent is only at the low 5th rank. His cultivation talent isn't high, but his comprehension isn't low. So Chu Mu is your Soaring Sky Courtyard's new Chief Senior Brother. This kind of genius who can't even reach the King Realm actually became your Soaring Sky Courtyard's Chief Senior Brother. Tao Shixiang sneered. What he meant was that it was the Soaring Sky Courtyard's misfortune for Chu Mu to become their Chief Senior Brother. Chapter 940. Then I'll let you, a true genius, guide me. A calm voice sounded as Chu Mu's figure flashed and appeared in front of Tao Shixiang like a gust of wind. Tao Shixiang was slightly startled by his sudden speed, but he soon recovered. All right, let me test the strength of the new chief disciple of the Soaring Sky Court, Tao Shixiang said with a smile. Chu Mu only smiled faintly and didn't say anything. Tao Shixiang's strength was indeed stronger than Zhong Yukin's, but take my sword! Tao Shixiang immediately used a grade 4 sword skill. A huge golden sword condensed in the air and slashed down. The battle stage trembled as if it was about to be split apart. Thundercloud storm. Thinking to himself, a powerful sword intent and 4 kinds of Upanishads gushed out from his body and gathered in the sword of no return. He slashed out with his sword. A terrifying whistling sound was heard as a terrifying windstorm rolled out, covering hundreds of meters in just a blink. Tao Shixiang's expression changed drastically when he saw this. Under the tyrannical thundercloud storm, the huge golden sword was sucked in and destroyed bit by bit. Under the tyrannical power of the thundercloud storm, the huge golden sword dissipated. The thundercloud storm that was dozens of meters long swept over, and a terrifying suction force fell on Tao Shixiang's body, causing him to lose his footing and almost be sucked into the thundercloud storm. Sword! 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 Tao Shixiang performed 3 third-rank sword techniques in a row and destroyed the thundercloud storm. The aftershock blasted towards Chu Mu. Immediately after, he used his sword to accumulate power. A powerful wave of profound energy gushed out from his body, and the sound of a tsunami could be heard as he used his sword. With a slash of his sword, a violent energy surged out like a tsunami, instantly covering the entire battle stage. The tyrannical power was even more shocking than the first move of the huge golden sword. Senior brother Tao will win for sure. The disciples of the fair sky court rejoiced, while the disciples of the soaring sky court looked worried. Only Zhongmukin had a calm expression. The violent impact of the waves wreaked havoc on the battle stage, and the momentum was extremely shocking. I'll win for sure. Tao Shixiang secretly smiled. There was no way Chu Mu could withstand such a powerful attack. When the tyrannical power of this sword technique dissipated, Chu Mu's silhouette appeared once again. He held the sword in both hands, standing vertically in front of him. His entire person was like a mountain, standing tall on the battle platform, unmoving. Tao Shixiang was shocked, and so were the disciples of the Flat Sky Academy. The disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy, on the other hand, were overjoyed. That was because the invisible protective energy around Chu Mu was still there. A fourth-grade defensive sword technique. Tao Shixiang said with difficulty, switching from defense to offense. The grade 4 sword skill, Thunderstorm, reappeared. A massive rumbling sound rang out as a terrifying storm that was hundreds of meters wide swept out, causing Tao Shixiang's expression to fall. Due to his haste, he didn't have enough time to use a fourth-grade sword technique to defend himself. He could only use 3 third-grade sword techniques consecutively. However, the difference between a third-grade sword technique and a fourth-grade sword technique was too great. Even if he used 3 moves consecutively, they were all destroyed by the thunderstorm. As the thunderstorm approached, a powerful suction force caused Tao Shixiang's body to lean forward. Unable to control his strength, he was sucked into the thunderstorm and destroyed. If it wasn't for the invisible protective energy, Tao Shixiang would have died within the thunderstorm. When the thunderstorm dissipated, Tao Shixiang felt the invisible protective energy dissipating. His expression changed. He had actually lost. He had lost to the sword of someone he looked down on. "Let Xiaoling do it," said Chu Mu. Tao Shixiang's expression kept changing. He took out 10,000 high-grade origin crystals and 100 flying points and handed them to Chu Mu. The quick-witted disciples of the Fair Sky Court immediately reacted and left the 100 Battles Tower to find Xiaoling. If Xiaoling didn't make a move, no one would be able to stop the Soaring Sky Court's disciples. Senior brother, senior brother, senior brother, something bad has happened. The disciples who came to find Xiaoling shouted in panic as they approached the Sword Tower. After a while, a person came out of the Sword Tower. His long hair draped over his shoulders and covered half of his face. The eyes that were exposed were extremely sharp, as if they contained a divine sword. With just a glance, the disciples outside the Sword Tower's seal had a drastic change in expression and took 3 steps back. "What's the matter?" Xiaoling asked in a cold voice. "Senior brother." The disciple suppressed the chill in his heart. After swallowing his saliva, he explained, "Something bad has happened. The Soaring Sky Court's new chief disciple defeated senior brother Tao. Apart from him, no one else in the Fair Sky Court is his match." "Who is the new chief disciple?" Xiaoling's voice was still cold as he walked out of the Sword Tower. "Tell me the situation." It's like this, senior brother." The disciple quickly explained everything from the Soaring Sky Court's disciples breaking into the 100 Battles Tower to how Chu Mu defeated Tao Shixiang. "That's what happened. Now, we need senior brother to make a move to defeat Chu Mu and defend our Fair Sky Court's prestige. A grade 4 defensive sword technique." Xiaoling muttered to himself. He ignored the disciple, and the sword light flashed on his body. He became one with his sword and flew several meters away from the ground. He was extremely fast as he rushed to the 100 Battles Tower. I wonder when I'll be able to comprehend the sword-controlling art. The old disciple of the fair sky court sighed enviously as he watched Shaoling disappear. Then he thought of something and quickly executed his movement technique, running at high speed like a cheetah. Chu-Mu, don't be too complacent. Defeating me is nothing. When senior brother Shao arrives, you'll know what defeat is, Tao Shixiang said to Chu-Mu. Tao Shixiang was actually very unwilling to be defeated by Chu-Mu. However, so what? He still lost. He could only accept this reality. I'll be waiting, Chu-Mu said. He did not refute because he was looking forward to his battle with Shaoling. Suddenly, a sharp aura assaulted them. Everyone seemed to have sensed something and quickly turned to look at the entrance of the 100 Battles Tower. They saw a beam of resplendent sword light that seemed to have come from the heavens. In the blink of an eye, it shot into the 100 Battles Tower and landed on the 100 Battles platform. It's Senior Brother Shao. Senior Brother Shao is finally here. Great! This time, we'll definitely win. Greetings, Senior Brother Shao. Greetings, Senior Brother Shao. Shaoling's personality was cold, but he was very strong. There was no doubt that he was the Fair Sky Court's senior brother. Because of this, his reputation in the Fair Sky Court was unparalleled. Shaoling was the pillar of the Fair Sky Court, the backbone of the Fair Sky Court's disciples. The moment he appeared, the Fair Sky Court's disciples felt as if they had found a harbor. Chu-Mu's eyes narrowed. Shaoling's entire being was like a sharp sword that had just been unsheathed, emitting a shocking sharpness. The air around him seemed to be affected, transforming into wisps of sword aura that drifted away before returning to the air. This cycle repeated itself. He's indeed a strong opponent, Chu-Mu muttered to himself. The Soaring Sky Court's disciples immediately became nervous. Even Zhong Yukin was no exception. Until now, Zhong Yukin had fought with Shaoling once in the past 3,000 years and suffered a crushing defeat. When facing Shaoling, his strength seemed so weak and powerless. He was directly defeated by Shaoling's sword. There was no luck to speak of. After that, he never saw Shaoling again. However, Shaoling was like an unsheathed sword. The shocking sharpness of Shaoling's sword had always been imprinted in his mind. After a long time, Zhong Yukin felt that his strength had increased. When he met Shaoling again, he should be able to easily face him. Only now did he realize that when facing Shaoling, his hands and feet would still tremble, just like 3 years ago. That figure was like a shadow entrenched in his mind, entrenched in his heart. Every powerful disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion had their own legends. As the Fair Sky Court's senior brother Shao, who had occupied this position for 7 years, there were naturally many legends about Shaoling. His strength was deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Although he appeared even less frequently than Zhong Yukin, his powerful image was still there. It was said that Shaoling had once challenged the Soaring Sky Court. Although he lost in the end, he still managed to display his might in the Soaring Sky Court. Shaoling was a powerful disciple who had refined his sword intent and profound to the late 8th revolution. He had comprehended 5 kinds of profound. His comprehension ability was also the highest in the Soaring Sky Court, surpassing many people in the Soaring Sky Court. He was only slightly inferior to a few people in the Soaring Sky Court. According to Zhong Yukin's knowledge, Shaoling had comprehended 2 grade 4 sword skills a few years ago. Now that a few years had passed, it was possible that he had already comprehended a 3rd grade 4 sword skill. The excited shouts of the Soaring Sky Court's disciples stopped when they saw Shaoling's actions. Shaoling raised his head slightly and looked at Chu-Mu. His sharp gaze shot out. Even his long hair couldn't block it in the slightest. It was as if 2 sword lights were shooting out of his eyes, wanting to destroy Chu-Mu's confidence. The sharpness on his body grew even stronger. The sword lights were as cold as ice in the extreme north. However, Chu-Mu wasn't afraid at all. His eyes also emitted a cold light as he shot out. meeting Xiaoling's gaze midway. The gazes of both sides were like sharp swords. After the collision, crackling sounds could be heard. Countless sparks flew out like dazzling fireworks. Sparks flew out one after another. The disciples of the Soaring Sky Court and the Soaring Sky Court below the 100 Battles stage all shut their mouths and watched quietly. All of them were either excited or nervous. The disciples of the Flat Sky Academy hoped that their chief disciple would be able to defeat the chief disciple of the Sky Soaring Academy with absolute strength and attitude. They wanted them to understand that the Sky Soaring Academy would always be at the bottom of the 3 academies and would never be able to make a comeback. The Soaring Sky Court's disciples hoped that their first senior brother would be able to defeat Xiaoling. It didn't matter if it was a clean victory or a difficult one. It was fine as long as the Soaring Sky Court's first senior brother was able to achieve their dream of soaring to the heavens. When their gazes collided, they were evenly matched. Space seemed to freeze for an instant. Then, both sides drew their swords. Chapter 941. In the blink of an eye, the 2 silhouettes crossed each other like lightning. Sparks flew, and a terrifying, ear-piercing sound pierced everyone's eardrums, causing them to frown. It was too fast, and the sound of the collision was too intense. On the 100 Battle stage, Chumu and Xiaoling's speed was raised to the extreme. Their swords were merciless, and each of them pursued the simplest and most destructive path. An intense battle. Chumu sighed inwardly. This Xiaoling was indeed worthy of being the lead disciple of the Fair Sky Academy. Not to mention other things. Just his swordsmanship had already reached such an extraordinary level. He was even stronger than Zhong Yukin. Xiaoling was strong, but Chumu was stronger. Xiaoling's attacks were incomparably sharp, but they were all blocked or dodged by Chumu. On the other hand, Chumu's counterattacks pressured Xiaoling from time to time. Facing the pressure of Chumu's swordsmanship, Xiaoling displayed an astonishing tenacity. He continued to endure and even constantly adjusted himself during the confrontation. This was a trait learned in battle. It was an extremely rare ability, and although it couldn't be compared to Chumu's, it was still shocking. Xiaoling could adjust himself, and so could Chumu. Xiaoling's pressure didn't change at all. They collided and intersected. One sword slashed out with almost all of his strength. The 2 swords clashed, and a powerful force erupted. Under the mountain quake energy, Xiaoling was sent flying, his blood and qi churning. Chumu took advantage of his victory and chased after Xiaoling. He slashed with his sword technique wind slash. Xiaoling's body transformed into a sword light and disappeared under Chumu's sword, causing Chumu's sword to miss. Defensive sword art. Zhong Yukin's eyes narrowed. This was the secret sword art of the Flying Heaven Pavilion that he wanted to comprehend, but had yet to comprehend. Turning around, the sword light was like a rainbow, sweeping across 1,000 troops. It collided with Xiaoling's sword once again. Releasing the mountain quake energy, Xiaoling was once again pushed back. His sword danced in the air, and the torrential water flowed endlessly like a river. Xiaoling's 4th rank sword technique was extremely fast. Chumu quickly reacted and used the sword technique Shocking Rainbow, instantly disappearing under the impact of the long river. His speed was extremely fast, and he was like a cloud of mist changing. Thunderstorm. A terrifying storm of hundreds of meters rolled out crazily, and the terrible suction force locked onto Xiaoling. Xiaoling's body trembled and flew toward the thunderstorm. He was shocked and performed the sword control technique, turning into a sharp sword light to get away from the suction force of the thunderstorm. He turned around and waved his sword again. In an instant, an ancient stream of ice seemed to extend from the void. Everywhere it passed, the air froze. Kacha, kacha, kacha. The entire battle platform was covered in ice, and the ground was covered in a layer of frost. Countless ice shards fell from the sky, and the frost on the ground of the battle platform quickly thickened. Grade 4 sword skill, Frosty River. The river of ice surged over, colliding with the thunderstorm and disappearing. The thunderstorm was frozen on the battle platform, shining with a sparkling luster, like a natural ice sculpture. Undying sword, chopping waterfall, volcanic eruption, rumbling thunder. 4 grade, 3 sword skills exploded, forming a river of sword skills. Xiaoling turned into a sword light, dodging and counterattacking. 1 grade, 3 sword skill after another formed a river of sword skills, blasting toward Chumu. On the battle platform, colorful lights flashed, and all kinds of energy attacks erupted. Powerful sword skills were continuously performed, and their power exploded. Under the river of sword skills, the frozen thunderstorm shattered, turning into countless ice shards that sputtered, covering the entire battle platform like a huge hailstorm. The frost on the ground dissipated, and Chumu and Xiao Ling each stood at a corner of the battle platform, facing each other. Xiao Ling's eyes were very sharp, as if they could pierce through the void. After an intense battle, both sides were evenly matched, neither side gaining the upper hand. Chu Mu's sword intent and profound had been refined to the peak of the 8th revolution, and he surpassed Xiaoling in this aspect. His sword intent and profound had only been refined to the late stage of the 8th revolution, but Xiaoling's mastery of sword skills was indeed better than Chu Mu's. Whether it was the execution speed or the power of the sword skills, Xiaoling was better than Chu Mu, especially Xiaoling, who had comprehended the imperial sword art. His body turned into a sword light, and his speed was extremely fast, allowing him to quickly dodge the sword skills. His speed was not any slower than Chu Mu's movement skill, Startling Rainbow. With the imperial sword art, Xiaoling had a 60 to 70% chance of winning. Chu Mu was shocked by Xiaoling's strength, and Xiaoling was also shocked by Chu Mu's strength. Tao Shixiang and the others also had solemn expressions. They originally thought that Xiaoling would be able to defeat Chu Mu quickly, but the current situation was different from what they had imagined. A 4th grade sword art consumes a lot of energy, and it cannot be used repeatedly. Chu Mu stared at Xiaoling as he thought to himself, if Xiaoling did not have the imperial sword art, he would have a greater chance of defeating him quickly. The imperial sword art was very powerful. Explode the 9th revolution, sword intent and profound. The thought flashed through Chu Mu's mind, but it was immediately rejected. All along, he had been using the 9th revolution sword intent and profound as one of his trump cards. Unless it was a life or death battle, he would not use it easily. Moreover, Chu Mu was more proficient in battle techniques, and not in crushing his opponent with absolute strength. Limiting his sword intent and profound to the peak of the 8th revolution sword intent and profound to defeat a strong opponent with this level of strength, he would be able to achieve greater results and improve himself better. Xiaoling was also thinking. Even with his cultivation, he could not use a 4th grade sword art too many times. Fight! Imperial sword art, Startling Rainbow. The speed of the two was so fast that it was beyond the eyes of the spectators, and they instantly collided. At the moment of collision, their divine wills locked onto each other, and the close combat sword skills were executed. The collision resulted in an explosion of power. An intense battle began once again. Seizing the opportunity, Xiaoling executed another 4th grade sword art. An intense ice storm seemed to come from the 9 heavens. The 3rd move! Zhong Yukin was shocked. As expected, Xiaoling had comprehended the 3rd 4th grade sword art. Holding the sword in front of him with both hands, his aura became one, as if he had turned into a mountain. 4th grade defensive sword art, Immovable Mountain. No matter how the ice storm blew, Chu Mu remained unmoved, as if he was not affected at all. When the ice storm's power was exhausted, Chu Mu was not shaken at all. Under the protection of the immovable mountain, the cold air surrounding him did not affect Chu Mu at all. Imperial sword art. With a low shout, Xiao Ling threw the sword in his hand into the air and formed a sword finger with one hand, quickly waving it in front of him. On the sword finger, sword intent and sword energy condensed. When the finger touched the falling sword, a melodious sound was heard, as if the sword had been given life. Different colored lights flashed on the sword, and the sword flew up, turning into a ray of light and shooting towards Chumu. The imperial sword art could not only be used to increase one's speed, but it could also be used to attack from a distance. In the blink of an eye, the sword arrived in front of Chumu and stabbed down. Sword intent, sword energy, and profound were condensed into the sword, making the sword's power extremely sharp. Shifting his feet and dodging the sword, Xiao Ling's expression was cold. His right hand's fingers were like a sword as he raised and chopped down, controlling the sword from afar. The sword that was stabbing the air was quickly raised and then chopped down heavily, trying to cut Chumu in half. His fingers moved as if they were flying, and sword light danced in the air. Sword after sword, it was as if there was an invisible person holding the sword, performing a strange yet sharp sword art, attacking Chumu crazily from every angle. Chumu could only wave his sword to block, unable to dodge or escape. Fast! Xiao Ling's sword under the imperial sword art was twice as fast as when he was holding it with his hand. Chumu increased the speed of his sword again and again, and gradually he felt like he was going to break through the limit of his sword's speed. The imperial sword art consumed more of his divine sense, but Xiao Ling's divine sense was not weak, so it would not be used up in a short period of time. Sword after sword, Chumu blocked all of the imperial sword art swords. He was looking for an opportunity to get rid of the imperial sword art's attacks and counterattack. His mind was working at high speed, trying to find a way out. After blocking the imperial sword art swords, Chumu turned his head to look at Xiao Ling in the distance. The sword of divine sense in his spiritual world suddenly fluctuated, and a light flashed. Two sword of divine sense phantoms instantly separated from the sword of divine sense and started to move around in the spiritual world. After one round, their speed increased, and after 9 rounds, their speed reached its peak. It seemed slow, but in reality it was extremely fast. Chumu's pupils instantly turned into the shape of a sword, and 2 sword of divine sense phantoms shot out from his eyes. In a fraction of a second, the phantoms pierced through the void and shot toward Xiao Ling without any obstruction. Xiao Ling was caught off guard and was hit by the sword of divine sense phantoms. They shot into his spiritual world and went straight for the sword soul. Xiao Ling was shocked. He quickly mobilized his divine sense and combined it with his sword will to form a phantom sword, and defeated the sword of divine sense phantoms. Xiao Ling was not Chumu, and he did not know how to multitask. Once he was distracted by the sword of divine sense phantoms that shot into his spiritual world. His control of the swords would be reduced to the lowest level, and the imperial sword art would be defeated on its own. Seizing the opportunity, Xiao Ling struck out with Wind Slash and knocked Xiao Ling's sword away. Xiao Ling landed in the distance, and with his sword art, Startling Rainbow, he appeared in front of Xiao Ling. Xiao Ling had also defeated the sword of divine sense phantoms. He reacted and used the imperial sword art to control his sword to turn around and stab towards Chumu's back. However, he had already lost the initiative and was one step too slow. Chumu appeared in front of Xiao Ling and exploded like a cloud of smoke. He flew past Xiao Ling and slashed with the sword of no return. The sword of no return was astonishingly sharp, and this slash was made with the close combat sword technique, Wind Slash. At the same time, Xiao Ling's sword stabbed towards the spot where Chumu's body had exploded, but it hit nothing. With the sword floating in front of him, Xiao Ling stood there in a daze. A trace of disbelief flashed across his cold face. The protective energy on his body had been destroyed by Chumu's slash. This was enough to prove that Chumu's slash could threaten his life. Below the 100 battle stage, there was complete silence. Everyone's eyes were wide open, and their mouths were wide open. Their brains were rusty, and they could not react in time. Chu Mu did not say anything, and the sword of no return returned to its sheath. Xiao Ling did not say anything, and under his control, the sword automatically returned to its sheath. He took out 10,000 high-grade origin crystals and 100 fairy points and handed them to Chu Mu. Then he leaped up and turned into a sword light, instantly rushing towards the entrance of the 100 Battles Tower from the 100 Battle stage, and disappeared. How did the chief disciple? Tao Shixiang muttered in a daze. He won. Zhong Mukin also muttered. Our chief disciple won. The Sky Soaring Academy's disciples also muttered. Shortly after, they shouted, Our chief disciple won. We won. Chapter 942. The atmosphere in the Flat Sky Academy was gloomy. The chief disciple was actually defeated. I didn't expect that the chief disciple would actually lose to someone from the Soaring Sky Academy. The disciples of the Flat Sky Academy were extremely dispirited. It was as if the pillar in their hearts had suddenly collapsed. It was as if they had lost all hope. Xiao Ling had always been the pride of the disciples of the Flat Sky Academy. But today, the pride in their hearts had been defeated before their very eyes. The pride and arrogance in their hearts had also been shattered. It was as if all of them had lost their motivation. They hung their heads dejectedly. Take a look at yourselves. What have you all become? Tao Shixiang's face was ashen. He was furious at their failure to fight. He roared at the disciples of the Flat Sky Academy. The reason why our Flat Sky Academy is ranked higher than the Soaring Sky Academy isn't just because our chief disciple is strong. It's also because our talent is above the Soaring Sky Academy's disciples. The dejected disciples raised their heads and looked at Tao Shixiang, who was shouting excitedly. No one can win all the time. Everyone has to face failure again and again. Only by picking yourself up from failure again and working hard to improve yourself and strengthen yourself, and strive to win the next time. Only then can you be a true swordsman. Tao Shixiang's tone softened slightly. Remember, our head disciple brother is also a human. He can win or lose. We can't turn the glory of the Heavenly Peace Academy into a burden on our head disciple brother. We should bear a part of it. Remember, each one of us is more talented than the disciples of the Soaring Sky Courtyard. This failure is only temporary. It can motivate us even more so that we don't get carried away. It can alert us and make us work even harder. The path of a swordsman isn't about a moment, but a lifetime. Tao Shixiang's tone was even gentler, but it was also more powerful. Everyone must remember that in the future, we will walk even further than the Soaring Sky Academy's disciples. In the future, we will leave them far behind. They won't even have the chance to catch up. His heavy and forceful words gradually dispelled the disciples' dejection and awakened their fighting spirit. All of them began to pull themselves back together. Senior Brother Tao is right. We are fighting for a lifetime, not a moment. Even if we lose this time, it's just a fluke. In the future, we will walk further than them and become stronger. That's right. The strength of the Flat Sky Academy is not only the responsibility of the head disciple. It is also the responsibility of all of us. That's right. Furthermore, I believe that although the chief disciple was defeated in the previous battle, if it had been a true life and death battle, the loser would have definitely been Chu Mu. These words were not without reason. Due to the invisible protective energy, the swordsmen were more or less hoping for a fluke. In addition, they did not use any secret techniques to increase their strength. After all, this was only a challenge and not a life-and-death battle. Secret techniques often had side effects, so there was no need to use them. Of course, they didn't know that if Chu Mu and Xiao Ling were to fight to the death, the one who would die would definitely be Xiao Ling. This was because no one knew the true strength of Chu Mu. Once he unleashed his true strength, it would be extremely tyrannical. Even Chu Mu himself wasn't very clear about it. Let's go and cultivate. We'll increase our strength first before turning the tables. Come, cheers. The situation in the Soaring Sky Academy was completely different from the Flat Sky Academy. The disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy were all so excited that they almost forgot themselves. In the 100 Battles Tower of the Soaring Sky Academy, all the disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy were present. Each and every one of them was holding a cup of wine and drinking to their heart's content. It was as if they had let go of all their worries. Drinking, drinking, drinking. There had never been a time when they drank so freely and joyfully. This was the first time since the establishment of the Soaring Sky Academy. The chief disciple of the Soaring Sky Academy had defeated the chief disciple of the Flat Sky Academy, fulfilling the wish of the Soaring Sky Academy's disciples for many years, to soar to the heavens in one go. The difference in talent seemed to have been erased in an instant. Chief disciple, let me toast you. I suggest that we toast our chief disciple together. Without him, we wouldn't have been able to fulfill this wish. Let's toast to our chief disciple. Several hundred disciples of the Soaring Sky Academy stood up one after another. Each of them held a cup of wine and surrounded Chu-Mu. They were extremely excited as they raised their cups high. Chu-Mu also raised his cup with a smile. After a circle, he drank to his heart's content. The pressure that had accumulated in their hearts for many years was completely released at this moment. They drank to their heart's content. Some lost their self-control. Some were sad and some were happy. Some even cried and laughed. Nie Xingkong and Li Qian had their arms around each other's shoulders. Zhong Yukin was also different from his usual indifference. He seemed to have lost his self-control. There was no need to suppress it. When he should be happy, he should be happy. When he should be laughing, he should be laughing. Perhaps this would be the only time. After drinking for more than 2 hours, everyone was a little tipsy. All right, fellow disciples, because of our chief disciple, our Soaring Sky Academy has realized the wish of soaring to the heavens in one go. Zhong Yukin's body swayed slightly as he stood up. Today, let's drink to celebrate. Now that the celebration is almost over, I believe that the pressure that has accumulated in everyone's hearts has mostly been released. Haha, Senior Brother Zhong is right. It is all thanks to our chief disciple that we are able to achieve this today. Let's invite our chief disciple to say a few words, Nie Xingkong said. He even burped, causing a burst of laughter. Chu-Mu also stood up. The laughter immediately died down as everyone looked at him. I'm very happy to be able to enter the Soaring Sky Academy and become fellow disciples with everyone. Chu-Mu was also a little tipsy. This was the first time he had drunk so much wine. Influenced by everyone, he couldn't help feeling a little excited. Actually, today's victory is insignificant for our path. We can be happy, but we can't place too much importance on it. We should set our sights further. Only by seeing further can we walk further. I won't say any superfluous words. Everyone isn't stupid. I only hope that after today's celebration, those who should be drunk will be drunk, and those who should be crazy will be crazy. After tomorrow, everyone should work harder in cultivating. Strength is your own, not someone else's. Chu-Mu finally said, I am no exception. I will constantly strive for self-improvement. Constantly strive for self-improvement. The disciples shouted in unison. Constantly strive for self-improvement. Suddenly, a cold snort came from outside. It carried a trace of ridicule. What a nice slogan. Unfortunately, talent determines one's achievements. Only by seeing further can we walk further. Isn't this saying too boastful? Another sarcastic voice said, Don't forget about your talents. No matter how far you can see, you're just watching others go further. The mocking voice immediately infuriated the drunken Soaring Sky Academy disciples. Who is it? Get out here! Several hundred angry gazes swept over the 100 Battles Pavilion's entrance. 3 figures appeared, 2 men and 1 woman. They gave off a sharp aura as they walked in with large strides. They showed no fear in the face of several hundred angry gazes. When Zhong Yukin saw the 3, his eyes narrowed, and he seemed to sober up a little. His expression also changed slightly. What advice do the three of you have? As the top disciple of the Soaring Sky Academy, Chu Mu had the responsibility to stand up. He circulated his sword origin, and the smell of alcohol quickly dissipated. He quickly sobered up. We are indeed here to advise you, one of the three female disciples said with a smile as she stared at Chu Mu. Her gaze turned sharp as she said, You are Chu Mu? The new top disciple of the Soaring Sky Academy, the genius who broke the record in the pavilion's entrance examination and comprehended 8 profundities and refined them to the limit of the 8th revolution? Unfortunately, your cultivation talent is only at the low 5th grade. Even if you have the opportunity to find a heavenly treasure to raise your cultivation talent in the future, it can only be raised to the 4th grade. You can only look at our backs for the rest of your life, the other person said with a mischievous smile. My talent has nothing to do with you, right? Chu Mu did not get angry. He only smiled and said unhurriedly, Of course, it has nothing to do with us. We also won't have anything to do with a cultivation trash like you. When the third person opened his mouth, his tone was sharp and his words were sharp. He didn't show any mercy, and his words were like a sharp sword that wanted to cut Chu Mu into pieces. Senior brother Chu. They're from the Sky Soar Academy. I recognize them. They're Wang Wei, Sun Yuan, and Xuanji Weiyue from the Sky Soar Academy. They're ranked 3rd and 4th in the Sky Soar Academy, although Xuanji Weiyue isn't ranked in the top 10. She's on good terms with the 2nd-ranked Lu Yi. It is said that Wang Wei and Sun Yuan have both comprehended the imperial sword art. Their sword intent and profundities have all been refined to the limit of the 8th revolution. They are even stronger than Shaoling. Zhong Nukin's voice condensed into a thread and entered Chu Mu's ears, allowing him to understand the origins of these three. Xuanji Weiyue. Chu Mu's gaze fell on the beautiful woman with a perfect figure. She was Xuanji Weiyue's elder sister. Half a year ago, Chu Mu received news that Tian Xiaoyu had done everything possible to reach the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Although he didn't pay much attention to it, he still remembered it. However, after half a year of peace, he had almost forgotten about it. Back then, Chu Mu had thought that the conflict between Tianxia and Xuanji Tyrannical was nothing much. He had only defeated Lum Changfeng and lost face for Xuanji Tyrannical. Xuanji Weiyue wouldn't find trouble with him over this. It seemed that his thinking was wrong. What was to come would come in the end. In fact, it was coming now. However, Chu Mu was not afraid. He would deal with whatever came his way. I heard that before you became a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion, you were very impressive. Xuanji Weiyue said coldly. Xuanji Weiyue said coldly. She didn't say it clearly, but Chu Mu vaguely knew that she was referring to the matter of Xuanji Wudao losing face. Impressive? You need to have the corresponding strength. Sun Yuan smiled. He turned into a sword light and passed through the crowd, landing on the 100 battle stage. Looking down from above, he drew his sword light and locked his sharp aura on Chu Mu. Chu Mu, come up. Let me teach you what kind of person is qualified to be impressive. Chief Senior Brother, defeat him. Yes, let them know that our Soaring Sky Court is not to be trifled with. Soaring Sky Court's disciples roared. Chief Senior Brother, we believe in you. Chapter 943. Take my sword. Flying Dragon Slash. Sun Yuan leaped into the air, holding the sword with both hands. He poured his sword intent into the sword, and the 4 types of profound energy turned into 4 dragons that circled around him. They went from the bottom to the top, wrapping around the sword and penetrating into it. The sword made a melodious sound, as if a dragon was roaring. The sword slashed down, and a dragon rushed out from the sword and dived down. The dragon was dozens of meters long and lifelike, as if it was a real immemorial desolate dragon. It looked ferocious, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. It rushed out from the void with a violent aura, wanting to tear Chu Mu into pieces. His eyes flashed, and he used the thundercloud storm. The storm was hundreds of meters long, and the battle platform shook. There was a strong rumbling sound that reverberated in all directions. The dragon dived down, wanting to tear the thundercloud storm apart, and the thundercloud storm madly attacked, wanting to kill the dragon. The two rank 4 sword skills were fighting against each other. The same rank 8 sword intent and profound, the same rank 8 sword intent, the same rank 8 sword origin, and the same almost perfect sword skill. However, Chu Mu's sword intent had a trace of immortal essence, which allowed his thundercloud storm to last for 3 more breaths. After 3 breaths, the dragon was killed, and the thundercloud storm shrunk a lot, rolling towards Sun Yuan in the air. How is this possible? Sun Yuan, Wang Wei, Xuanji, and Wu Yue were stunned. Then Sun Yuan waved his sword with great force, as if he was going to break a mountain and destroy the aftermath of the thundercloud storm. Defensive sword art. With a low shout, Sun Yuan didn't use the rank 4 sword skill to attack Chu Mu. Instead, he threw his sword into the air, formed a sword finger, and quickly waved it. He pointed at the falling sword, and the sword trembled as if it had been activated. It flew out at an extreme speed, shooting toward Chu Mu like a ray of light. At the same time, Sun Yuan's left hand formed a sword and slashed through the air. A blue sword ray with continuous power drew an arc through the air and shot towards Chu Mu from the side. This was a 3rd rank sword technique. This move alone showed that Sun Yuan's attainment in the defensive sword art was better than Shaoling's. There would always be someone stronger than you. No one was truly invincible unless they became a sword god. In an instant, Chu Mu faced 2 attacks, both of which were enough to threaten his life. How should Chu Mu deal with this? Everyone felt their vision blur for a moment. Chu Mu's figure seemed to have moved, but at the same time, it also seemed like he hadn't. Following that, a sharp sound rang out. Sun Yuan's flying sword was knocked away by Chu Mu's sword. A grade 3 sword skill had shattered Chu Mu's afterimage. The flying sword that was deflected turned in midair and borrowed the momentum to slash down with even greater force. Sun Yuan's left hand once again formed a sword and drew a circle in the air. Then he pointed forward and a dazzling golden light shot out like an aurora. It was still a grade 3 sword skill. The speed of the golden sword light was extremely fast. Sun Yuan was very familiar with the combination of the defensive sword art and the sword finger sword art. Immediately, it brought great pressure to Chu Mu. What a clown! Wang Wei stared at Chu Mu, who was constantly blocking and dodging on the battle arena, and said sarcastically, dodging the grade 3 sword skill of the sword finger sword art, Sun Yuan used the pupil of sword secret art. The sword shadow of the divine sense instantly shot out. Chu Mu had already cultivated the second half of the pupil of sword secret art. However, he hadn't really mastered it yet. Therefore, it took a lot of time to use it, and its power wasn't strong enough. The power of the pupil of sword shot out from Chu Mu's eyes. It penetrated the void and shot into Sun Yuan's spiritual world. Sun Yuan was shocked. He quickly gathered his sword will and divine sense to form a sword shadow to shatter the power of the pupil of sword. In an instant, Sun Yuan's control over the sword dropped. Seizing the opportunity, he used the wind cutter sword skill and the powerful mountain trembling energy to knock the sword shadow away. Then he used the startling rainbow movement skill and appeared in front of Sun Yuan in an instant. The unreturnable sword slashed out, drawing a sharp arc in the air. The sword was unstoppable. Sun Yuan reacted quickly and immediately adjusted his stance. Using the imperial sword art, the sword light spun, wanting to kill Chu Mu. At the same time, he used the fingers of his left hand as a sword to slash at Chu Mu. He used a grade 3 sword skill. Chu Mu used the startling rainbow movement again and disappeared from Sun Yuan's sword. His sword slashed out and broke through Sun Yuan's invisible barrier. Senior Apprentice Brother 1. The disciples of the sky-soaring court breathed a sigh of relief. The name of the sky-soaring court gave them a lot of pressure. It was even greater than Shaoling's. "You're lucky." Sun Yuan stared at Chu Mu with an unwilling expression. He gnashed his teeth and said, "If it was a battle of life and death, you definitely wouldn't be my match." "It doesn't matter. 10,000 high-grade origin crystals and 100 flying points," said Chu Mu. This was what they had agreed on before the battle. Sun Yuan angrily took out 10,000 high-grade origin crystals and 100 flying points and gave them to Chu Mu. "Junior apprentice Sister Moonless, I'm sorry," said Sun Yuan to Xuanji Moonless with an unsightly expression. Xuanji Moonless only coldly glanced at Sun Yuan before looking at Wang Wei and smiling. "Senior apprentice Brother Wang, I'll have to trouble you." "Don't worry, Junior apprentice Sister Moonless." Wang Wei glanced at Sun Yuan and smiled proudly. Then he looked at Chu Mu and his gaze became cold. He transformed into sword light and appeared in front of Chu Mu. Without saying anything, he slashed out with his sword. Wild, tyrannical, fierce, unbridled, crazy attacks. Wang Wei's sword skills were about the same as Shaoling's, but they were extremely berserk. Each of his moves was like a flood or a tsunami. At first, Chu Mu was caught unprepared, but he quickly adjusted and counterattacked. Realizing that he couldn't defeat Chu Mu quickly, Wang Wei retreated and used a grade 4 sword skill. The distance was too close for him to use Thunderstorm, so Chu Mu used Immovable Mountain to block Wang Wei's sword skill, continuously exploding. The second fourth rank sword technique was cast, but it was still blocked by Chu Mu's defensive sword technique, Immovable Mountain. What a strong defensive sword skill! Sun Yuan quickly retreated and used his third grade 4 sword skill. The tyrannical power bombarded Chu Mu's body, but it was still blocked by Immovable Mountain. His body swayed as he retreated and used Thunderstorm to counterattack. Chu Mu has 3 grade 4 sword skills, 1 offensive sword skill, 1 defensive sword skill, and 1 movement sword skill. Wang Wei, Sun Yuan, and the others were very surprised. They knew that Chu Mu had only been a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion for a little more than a year, but he had already comprehended 3 grade 4 sword skills in less than 2 years. Or did he already have grade 4 sword skills before he became a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion? No matter what it was very amazing. The sword was tossed up and the sword finger moved. Using the defensive sword technique, the sword light was swift and violent. Like a meteor from outer space, it brought with it a shocking power and fell from the sky towards Chu Mu. The terrible breath locked on Chu Mu, making him feel like he was being penetrated. Wang Wei's sword defending technique was more powerful than Sun Yuan's. At the same time, Wang Wei's left fingers moved and used a grade 3 sword skill and the sword defending technique to attack Chu Mu. His left-hand sword fingers moved with schwa, schwa, schwa sounds, displaying 1/3 rank sword technique after another. His right-hand sword fingers also moved, remotely controlling his flying sword. With astonishing sword speed, he coordinated with the 3rd rank sword techniques from all angles, attacking Chu Mu without any blind spots. The pressure on Chu Mu was stronger than Sun Yuan's, so Chu Mu couldn't find a chance to use his sword skill, Shocking Rainbow. Shocking Rainbow was a grade 4 sword skill. In order to use it, it needed a short time to accumulate power because it was not perfect. In terms of perfection, it was not as good as Thundercloud Storm. Wang Wei's sword defending technique was very fast, and it cooperated perfectly with the grade 3 sword skill in his left hand, constantly attacking Chu Mu. Chu Mu dodged the sword skills and blocked the sword defending technique while looking for an opportunity. The Sword of Divine was activated, and the secret technique, Pupil of Sword, was used again. The power of the Pupil of Sword was shot out. "I have been waiting for this." Wang Wei laughed coldly. He closed his eyes and blinked. His pupils instantly transformed into a rotten silver color. An extreme sharpness swallowed and instantly shot out. The nearly transparent silver light broke through the air and collided with the sword puppet's power in midair. After letting out a pa-la sound, the sword pupil's power collapsed and the faint silver light was faintly discernible as it continued to shoot towards Chu-Mu. Chu-Mu used the secret technique, pupil of sword again. The power of the sword puppet collided with the faint silver light, and both of them collapsed. The secret technique, pupil of sword, was powerful, but Chu-Mu hadn't mastered it yet, so he couldn't fight against Wang Wei's divine will secret technique. The combination of the sword defending technique, the sword skill in his left hand, and the secret technique to attack with divine will made Chu-Mu helpless. With a change of thought, another sharp sword appeared in his left hand, and it was also a royal grade sword. With both swords in his hands, he moved his feet and his body changed. The sword in his left hand blocked the sword defending technique's flying sword, and the no-return sword in his right hand once again used the sword skill, Wind Slasher, to cut the flying sword away. The sword in his left hand also used the sword skill, Wind Slasher, to continuously cut the flying sword. A tyrannical power burst out and split the flying sword. The two swords attacked the flying sword from the front and back, causing it to fly backward and tremble violently. Wang Wei's sword defending technique was also temporarily disrupted, so he quickly adjusted. The flying sword circled in the distance, and the sharpness shot out again. An ear-piercing, whistling sound pierced through the air, and the sharpness locked onto Chu-Mu again. However, Chu-Mu had already seized the opportunity to accumulate power and use the sword skill, Shocking Rainbow, to instantly disappear under the flying sword stab. When he reappeared in front of Wang Wei, Wang Wei's left hand used the sword skill to attack, and another sword appeared in his right hand, which he stabbed at a tricky angle. Chu-Mu's body changed like a cloud, causing the sword skill to miss. Chu-Mu's left hand's sword shattered Wang Wei's sword, and the no-return sword's natural counterattack was untraceable. At the same time, the secret technique to attack with divine will, the pupil of sword, was used again. Out of Wang Wei's expectation, he also used the secret technique to attack with divine will, and they instantly clashed. Although Wang Wei was powerful, he did not have the ability to multitask. The sword in his hand stopped, and his body was slashed by Chu-Mu's sword. The invisible protective energy blocked Chu-Mu's sword, but it disappeared under Chu-Mu's sword skill. I lost. Wang Wei held his sword, and his face was filled with astonishment and disbelief. You have indeed lost, Chu-Mu said. Many thanks for Senior Marshal Brother Wang's guidance, and many thanks for the high-grade essence crystals and flying points. Hearing Chu-Mu's words, Wang Wei's anger surged up, and he almost vomited blood. Chapter 944. Wang Wei took out 10,000 high-grade origin crystals and 100 fairy points to give to Chu-Mu and said coldly, "Don't be complacent. In a battle to the death, I'll kill you like a dog." Chu-Mu took the origin crystals and fairy points. He didn't react to Wang Wei's words. In a battle to the death, one could only know who would be killed like a dog. Don't talk about a battle to the death. You won't be so lucky in the next 100 battle stage. Sun Yuan said coldly. Chu-Mu, this isn't over, Xuanzhu said with a cold expression. One day, I'll sweep through the soaring heaven court with my sword. Go back and wait, Chu-Mu retaliated. Very well. I hope you have the courage to do so when the time comes, Sun Yuan said angrily. After being defeated by Chu-Mu, the two of them didn't have the face to continue staying. Xuanzhu had brought people to teach Chu-Mu a lesson, but instead they were taught a lesson. No matter how thick one's skin was, they couldn't be invulnerable. The three of them glared hatefully at Chu-Mu. Their gazes were as sharp as swords, as if they wanted to pierce through Chu-Mu. They coldly snorted and quickly left. They left as quickly as they came. Senior brother is too strong. Even the soaring heaven court's disciples weren't his match. I know. Those two are Wang Wei and Sun Yuan. They're ranked third and fourth in the Soaring Heaven Court. Even they weren't a match for senior brother. The Soaring Heaven Court's disciples became even more excited. When everyone's emotions gradually calmed down, Chumu told everyone to leave and return to cultivate. He also returned to his own stone tower. Defensive sword technique. Sitting in the building, Chumu didn't immediately train. Instead, he thought back to the previous fights. The fight with Shaoling, the fight with Sun Yuan, and the fight with Wang Wei. The three of them had a common point, and that was the defensive sword technique. The Imperial Sword Art was a secret sword art unique to the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Each of the West Tiger regions, 5 major powers, had their own unique cultivation techniques. Naturally, each major power wanted to learn the cultivation techniques of the other major powers. Unfortunately, it was very difficult. In the hands of different swordsmen, the power of the Imperial sword technique was different. Shaoling was inferior to Sun Yuan, and Sun Yuan was inferior to Wang Wei. From the looks of it, Lu Yi, who's ranked second in the Soaring Heavens Court, is definitely stronger than Wang Wei. As for the chief disciple of the Soaring Heavens Court, Chumu fell silent. The leader of the Soaring Heavens Academy was usually much stronger than the leader of the Soaring Heavens Academy. Without witnessing it with his own eyes, it was impossible to determine the strength of the leader of the Soaring Heavens Academy. However, Chumu's intuition told him that he wasn't a match for the Soaring Sky Academy's chief disciple if he didn't use his 9 revolution, sword intent, and profound meaning. Wouldn't that be more motivating? Even though he was determined to enter the Soaring Sky Court, there was no need to rush it. Chumu still planned to cultivate according to his original plan. He needed to use the 4 intermediate sands of time. He needed to improve his alchemy skills, the elemental sword art, the wind lightning sword art, and the cloud sword art. He needed to cultivate the eye of the sword as well as the divine, desolate sword art. The competition between the 3 academies was ultimately just a small matter. Chumu's vision wasn't limited to this. The real stage was the ancient world outside the Flying Heaven Pavilion's pocket world. However, small matters were still a type of tempering that he had to go through. After doing some calculations, Chumu had a total of 1,130 flying points. It was enough for him to comprehend the murals twice. However, Chumu didn't plan to comprehend the murals right away. Instead, he took out his alchemy cauldron and various herbs from his stone pavilion. He recalled the various pill recipes in his mind and found the ones that would help him improve his alchemy skills. He first simulated them in his mind before extracting the essence of the herbs. With the earth core desolate flame, extracting the essence of the herbs was very smooth. The purity of the essence was also above 90%. After extracting the essence, he started to refine the pills. He first refined the mortal grade pills to consolidate his attainments and realm as an alchemy grandmaster. He would strengthen his foundation before accumulating more. 1 month in the outside world was 4 months with the intermediate sands of time. During these 4 months, Chumu spent half of his time refining pills and the other half cultivating his sword arts. After 4 months, the elemental sword art, the wind lightning sword art, the cloud sword art, and the others were still at the 8th move. His alchemy skills had the most obvious improvement. In the 2nd month, Chumu used another intermediate sands of time and spent another 4 months. The 3rd month was a month where Chumu focused on enlightenment. He further consolidated his foundation, making it even more stable and accumulating potential. In the 4th month, Chumu used the intermediate sands of time again, turning the 1 month into 4 months. When Xiao Qin opened the cauldron, the fragrance of the medicinal pills wafted out. This was a mortal grade medicinal pill, the highest grade of mortal grade medicinal pills. It also directly displayed Chumu's progress in alchemy. Next, I will consolidate my alchemy attainments at this level. After that, I will try to refine earth grade medicinal pills. Earth grade medicinal pills corresponded to the attainments of an alchemy Grandmaster. Right now, Chu Mu was only one step away from becoming an alchemy Grandmaster. While consolidating his alchemy skills, he also continued to cultivate his sword arts. When the energy of the third intermediate sands of time was exhausted, Chu Mu mastered the elemental sword art, the wind lightning sword art, and the cloud sword art's ninth move. After mastering the ninth move, Chu Mu immediately felt his understanding of the 8 profound meanings of metal, wood, water, fire, earth, wind, thunder, and cloud rise to a whole new level. His grasp and application of these 8 profound meanings also rose to a whole new level. The improvement in his grasp and application of the profound meanings allowed Chu Mu's understanding of the various sword arts to deepen to a whole new level. In the 5th month, the last intermediate sands of time was used by Chu Mu. He first used a month to consolidate his alchemy skills as an alchemy grandmaster. After that, he would try to refine earth-grade medicinal pills. Earth-grade medicinal pills were superior to mortal-grade medicinal pills. The requirements for alchemy skills were also higher. The various medicinal herbs needed were of higher grade, better quality, and more valuable. Fortunately, Chu Mu had a large collection of medicinal herbs in his interspatial ring. A portion of them were precious medicinal herbs for refining earth-grade medicinal pills. He found the most common earth-grade medicinal pill recipe in his memory. First, he simulated it in his spiritual world. Then he started to refine it. First, he extracted the medicinal herb's essence. With the help of the earth core desolate flame, even with the basic extraction method, he was still able to extract the medicinal herb's essence to above 90% purity. After extracting the medicinal herb's essence, Chu Mu rested to recover the energy he had expended. Then he started to refine earth-grade medicinal pills. By now, the earth core desolate flame had grown to the size of 2 fists. Its entire body was bright yellow and its temperature was extremely high. If hit directly, even a king stage expert would find it difficult to withstand the burning of the earth core desolate flame. Of course, with Chu Mu's strength, if he wanted to use the earth core desolate flame to burn a king stage expert, the king stage expert would have to be unprepared and stand still to be burned by the earth core desolate flame. Using the power of the earth core desolate flame consumed sword energy. Using the power of divine sense to activate it was the same as using sword energy as fuel. Fortunately, Chu Mu's cultivation had reached the limit of the god condensation realm. His sword energy was pure and powerful. It could support the burning of the earth core desolate flame for a period of time. In addition, he had many high-grade origin crystals to absorb and replenish his sword energy. The first batch of earth-grade medicinal pills ended in failure. Earth-grade medicinal pills have a higher requirement for alchemy skills. The control is more subtle and there are more variations. It's not something that can be satisfied with basic alchemy skills. Chu Mu recalled the process of alchemy and concluded the reason for failure. It seems that basic alchemy skills can no longer satisfy my needs. I need to find a more advanced alchemy skill. What Chu Mu regretted was that in the alchemy grandmaster's memories, there was knowledge of countless medicinal herbs, many alchemy recipes, basic alchemy skills, and basic alchemy skills. However, there was no advanced alchemy skill or advanced alchemy skill. He didn't know what the alchemy grandmaster who left behind the alchemy legacy was thinking. No matter what, he had to find a more advanced alchemy skill. It would be best if there was a matching alchemy skill for alchemy. The Flying Heaven Pavilion should also have alchemy skills. Chu Mu thought to himself. He felt a headache coming on. When the Sand of Time was used, its range was fixed. In other words, Chu Mu, who had used the Sand of Time, could only stay here and cultivate. Once he left, the power of the Sand of Time would dissipate. The Sand of Time was very precious. This was the last grain. There were still 3 months left. No matter what, Chu Mu couldn't waste it. Since that's the case, I'll use these 3 months to cultivate my swordsmanship and sword skills." Chu Mu could only think to himself helplessly. Casting aside all distracting thoughts, Chu Mu wholeheartedly cultivated his swordsmanship. Although he had cultivated the last move of the 5 elemental swordsmanship, the wind and lightning swordsmanship and the cloud swordsmanship, to the 9th move, this wasn't his limit. There was still potential to develop the 9th move. As his cultivation deepened, he became more proficient and perfected the 9th move. His understanding and mastery of the profound also deepened. In terms of application, he improved and became more flexible. While cultivating his swordsmanship, Chu Mu didn't neglect the cultivation of various sword skills. He even put in some time to cultivate a grade 1 sword skill. Strictly speaking, there was no useless sword skill. Even a grade 1 sword skill could sometimes be relied on to turn the situation around. Moreover, a deeper mastery of a grade 1 sword skill would be helpful to a grade 2 sword skill. A deeper mastery of a grade 2 sword skill would be helpful to a grade 3 sword skill. Similarly, a deeper mastery of a grade 3 sword skill would be helpful to a grade 4 sword skill. One step after another, increasing layer by layer. None of the steps could be ignored. A 10,000 zhang tall building had to be built from the ground. First, it had to have a solid foundation. Then, it had to be built layer by layer. Only then would it be stable and could be built even higher. Swordsmanship was the foundation. A grade 1 sword skill was the lowest level. A grade 2 sword skill was 1 level higher. A grade 3 sword skill was 1 level higher, and so on. If one wanted to create a higher grade sword skill, the foundation and the building at the bottom were indispensable. They had to be very stable. Chapter 945. In the stone tower, Chu Mu held the sword of no return with both hands and raised it high. His body was straight, like a sharp sword that was about to break through the air. There was a flash of light on the sword of no return. There seemed to be countless clouds rolling in front of him. His eyes flashed in gold, cyan, and purple intertwined. He shouted in a low voice, and the sword slashed straight forward. The indescribable, majestic momentum, the wind and clouds surged, and the wind and clouds changed. The extreme sharpness was released from the sword edge, cutting and tearing everything. The violent power and the amazing speed merged into one. Under the sword, the dim golden color contained an amazing violent power and sharpness. It broke through layers of time and space, broke through layers of clouds in front of him, and dispersed the clouds to see the moon, and dispersed the dark clouds to see the blue sky. The space in the stone tower seemed to have really been split open. There was a clear sense of hierarchy, and the light was distorted. After a while, it returned to its original state until the power of the sword technique dissipated. Chu Mu did not inject any sword essence into this sword technique. He only used a little sword essence and profound meaning. What he focused on was the intent of the sword technique. The stone tower could not withstand the power of a 4th grade sword technique. From the intent of this sword technique, one could see that it was an extremely terrifying 4th rank offensive sword technique. In terms of single target direct destructive power, it wasn't inferior to Thunder Cloud Storm at all. Yet this sword technique was a newly created 4th rank offensive sword technique that Chu Mu created. In terms of perfection, it was clearly inferior to Thunder Cloud Storm. Once the perfection of this new 4th grade sword technique was improved to the same level as Thunder Cloud Storm, its single target lethality would obviously surpass Thunder Cloud Storm. This move will be called through the clouds to see the blue sky, Chu Mu said to himself. So far, the 4th grade sword technique was successfully created. If people knew that Chu Mu had only been a disciple of the Flying Heaven Pavilion for less than 2 years, but he had already created 4 4th grade sword skills from scratch. Moreover, he had never studied the murals of the Flying Heaven sword skill before. They would definitely be shocked. It should be known that most of the Soaring Pavilion's disciples grade 4 sword skills were comprehended after studying the murals of the soaring sword technique. Even a talented swordsman like Shaolin had 3 grade 4 sword skills that were somewhat related to comprehending the murals of the soaring sword technique. Even the legendary Qin Tianyi had comprehended at least half of his sword skills after comprehending the murals of the soaring sword technique. On the other hand, Chu Mu's 4 4th-grade sword skills were created after he had practiced various swordsmanship, deepened his understanding and mastery of various profound meanings, deepened his application, and combined with his own accumulation, potential, and amazing comprehension ability. It was obvious who was better and who was worse. In order to create this new sword skill, through the clouds to see the blue sky, Chu Mu's accumulation during this period of time was once again exhausted. The middle-grade sand of time was consumed, leaving only a few low-grade sand of time and 13 high-grade sand of time. The low-grade sand of time was useless to Chu Mu, and the high-grade sand of time was too heavy to bear, so he couldn't use it for the time being. The Flying Heaven Pavilion should have a good alchemy technique. Chu Mu planned to find a good alchemy technique in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. It was better to use the basic technique than the ordinary one. Right, where should I go to get it? A question popped up. He had never heard of a place called the Art Depository Pavilion in the Flying Heaven Pavilion. There was only a mural of the Flying Heaven Pavilion that was similar to the one in the Art Depository Pavilion. I'll ask Senior Brother Zhong. Chu Mu left the stone tower. Zhong Mukin had spent much more time in the Flying Heaven Pavilion than he had, so he must have a deeper understanding of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. Alchemy technique. Zhong Mukin frowned and thought carefully, then shook his head. I don't know either. Maybe only the pavilion elders know. Hearing this, Chu Mu couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. It seemed that the Flying Heaven Pavilion didn't care much about alchemy, or maybe his current status was too low to reach the top. It seems that the idea of obtaining a good alchemy technique from the Flying Heaven Pavilion won't work for the time being. Chu Mu left Zhong Mukin's lake tower and thought to himself, now my alchemy skills have reached the threshold of Grandmaster and Alchemy Grandmaster. My accumulation is enough. As long as I have a good alchemy technique, I will be able to break through in a short time and reach Alchemy Grandmaster. Since that's the case, I'll change my cultivation now and focus on improving my strength. When I leave the Flying Heaven Pavilion and go out to train, I'll look for a good alchemy technique in the outside world. After confirming the direction of his cultivation, the plan in his mind became much clearer. Chu Mu knew what he had to do next. I've already grasped the 9th move of the 5 elements sword art, wind lightning sword art, and cloud sword art. The next step is to further familiarize myself with them and comprehend new sword arts. Chu Mu had comprehended 10 types of profound. Until now, he still hadn't comprehended the corresponding sword arts for the profound of ice and profound of space. Therefore, his new goal was to comprehend the sword art of ice and sword art of space. Chu Mu felt that the sword art of ice wouldn't be a problem, but he didn't have much confidence in comprehending the sword art of space. After all, the profound of space was very difficult to comprehend and refine. It took him a lot of time to refine it to the limit of the 9th revolution. No matter what, he had to comprehend the sword art of ice first. Instead of returning to the stone tower, he went directly to the Flying Heaven Pavilion's underground palace. He showed his identity sword token and paid 500 sky points to enter the underground palace. He sat cross-legged in front of the sword art mural and stared at it without blinking. Gradually, he entered a state of comprehension. His vision narrowed bit by bit until it finally locked onto a trace. It was an ice blue trace. He continued to stare at the ice blue mark. Time passed breath by breath without a sound. Chu Mu's mental strength was also constantly being consumed, like an endless stream of water. Finally, the ice blue trace flickered and left the mural. It turned into an ice blue sword light and swept across. Everywhere it passed, ice would spread. Chu Mu's spiritual world turned into a world of ice and snow in an instant. In the world of ice and snow, a figure condensed. An ice sword condensed in his hand and danced. It was an ice sword art that also had 9 moves. Chu Mu, who had cultivated the 5 elemental sword art, wind lightning sword art, and cloud sword art to the 9th move, Deshang, only needed to go through it once to grasp the entire ice sword art. His understanding and application of the ice profound rapidly increased. I can cultivate the ice sword art to the 9th move in a short period of time. With the previous 8 sword arts as a foundation, it wasn't difficult for him to grasp the ice sword art of the same level. There were still many hours left in a day. Chu Mu quickly seized the time and continued to comprehend the Flying Heaven mural. He wanted to see if he could comprehend the Void Creation sword art in one go. The Void Profound was much stronger than the other Profound. Naturally, the Void sword art was more profound. The difficulty of comprehending it was dozens of times higher. Time slowly passed. Gradually, Chu Mu felt his eyes turning sour. He couldn't find any trace of the Void sword art. Without finding any trace, he couldn't comprehend the Void sword art. The sword art mural wasn't very big, but there were many sword art traces on it. They were crisscrossed and very complicated. When comprehending, the human brain was like a computer that constantly searched for the corresponding sword art traces. Many sword art traces actually corresponded to the same sword art. In theory, any sword art trace could be comprehended into a sword art. However, the problem was that some sword art traces were useless to the comprehender. Therefore, every cultivator had to search for a trace that would allow them to comprehend the corresponding sword skill from the complicated intersecting sword skill traces. Let's stop here for now. Chu Mu closed his eyes and let his sore eyes rest. After 10 breaths, he opened them again and remembered where he had comprehended so that he wouldn't have to do it again the next time. With this method, he might be able to comprehend the Void sword art in a few tries. There was still time. Chu Mu looked at the other 2 murals. One was a sword art mural, and the other was a sword secret mural. The sword art mural was used to comprehend the sword art. The sword art mural contained the sword art that could be comprehended and used directly. It could also be used to help one comprehend the sword art. Most of the comprehenders chose the latter. The sword secret mural contained the sword secret of the Flying Heaven Pavilion. The imperial sword art was in it. The patterns on the swordsmanship murals and the swordsmanship murals were completely different. The marks on the swordsmanship murals were fragmented and messy, while the marks on the swordsmanship murals were thin and long, either straight or twisted. The marks on the swordsmanship murals were in patches, as if they existed independently and were connected to each other. Getting up, his body flashed and appeared in front of the sword secret mural. He sat down cross-legged and began to comprehend. Chu Mu's goal was to comprehend the imperial sword art. Whether it was in terms of power, practicality, or aesthetics, the imperial sword art was very good and powerful. Chu Mu believed that if he could comprehend the imperial sword art, his overall strength would definitely increase significantly. His battle strength would be even more tyrannical. His gaze fell on the sword secret mural, and he began to comprehend it carefully. Chu Mu didn't know which mural was the imperial sword art. He could only comprehend it one by one. Fortunately, he didn't need to comprehend it in depth. He only needed to comprehend it slightly, and he could feel whether it was the imperial sword art or not. After a few times, Chu Mu locked onto one of the mural. His intuition told him that this was the sword secret mural he wanted to comprehend. Imperial sword art. His gaze was fixed on the traces. The traces on the mural were somewhat scattered and seemed to have no pattern. However, when he looked more carefully, Chu Mu gradually found the pattern. Vaguely, he seemed to see a person sitting in front of him. His fingers were like a sword. Using the sword finger method, he gently drew traces in front of him. Every trace was the same as the traces on the imperial sword secret mural. When the figure's sword finger drew the last trace, he suddenly pointed forward. An extremely sharp sword light shot out from the sword's secret mural and shot towards Chu Mu.